The fatal event in the life of the main character occurred when he was carrying out another task. The guy was running with all his might, out of breath, and sweat was running down his face. The guy saw a notification from the ominous system asking him to follow the rules and not jump out of windows during the chase. The protagonist became indignant, shouting that he had just robbed a bank, so no rules mattered now. Looking back, he saw two creatures with sharp ears and claws in front of him who were trying to catch up with him, their eyes glowing with a purple light. The young man decided not to turn left, as the system asked him to, since he no longer cared about the rules, and tried to escape through the window. The protagonist landed successfully on the street and decided that he had managed to escape his pursuers. The guy was deeply mistaken because a second later he saw a fist that was rapidly approaching his face, breaking the window. Our hero grunted loudly in pain as he received a powerful blow to the back, and shards of glass flew in all directions. The blow was so strong that the young man fell on his back right onto the road, so he was unable to escape. 3 employees of the demonic bank approached him. One of them ordered the others to block the guy's path and said that his escape violated the rules of the game. The main character, having cleared his throat, grabbed his heart with his hand and tried to get up. He understood that he was in serious trouble. Our hero's name was Chen Mu, and for years he watched his squad perish in this apocalypse as darkness descended upon the land. He spent every night in anxiety and caution, but in the end, the monsters of the apocalypse still drove the guy into a corner. In the new, scary world, money still decided a lot, especially when it came to buying off death, and Chen Mu knew it. So, to escape this hell where only the strongest survives, he decided to take a risk and rob a ghost bank using an epic spatial ring. Unfortunately, the robbery was unsuccessful. During his escape, our hero was caught, everything was taken away, and his plan failed. The protagonist no longer had the strength to fight, his body went limp, but in his head he kept repeating that he was not going to accept this. The boy firmly decided that he was not going to accept his death in this cruel world when the life in his body was rapidly fading. Suddenly, the epic spatial ring that was on the protagonist's finger began to emit bright rays of white light. The next action took place in the local school, but a large red moon was shining in the sky and crows were gathered in a flock on a tree. An ominous atmosphere also reigned in the corridor of the school. A red light penetrated into the school through the windows. The protagonist's eyes suddenly opened and he saw a school classroom in front of him. In fact, his life had not ended. Chen Mu was shocked because just a moment ago he was lying beaten on the asphalt in front of the ghost bank. The stunned boy stood up from his desk and wondered if he had been reborn because he found himself back in his school. Classmates were discussing the evil things that had started happening in the city, and the girl advised the boy to be careful, as he could become a target or end up on the rookie list. Shocked, Chen Mu, hearing his classmates' conversations, began to guess what was going on here. He guessed that this was the beginning of a nightmare, because the calendar showed December 31st, 2021, when it all began. The guy wondered if he would have to relive all those terrible days again, remembering the horrific events from the past. His mouth dropped open in surprise when he looked at his right hand and noticed the ring on his finger that had served him in his past life. Chen Mu couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the spatial epic ring, because he had acquired it in his previous life after the apocalypse had already begun. He was even more surprised when he looked into the hiding place and saw that all the phantom money stolen from the bank was there. A smile finally appeared on his face because in this life he would be able to turn the game around, because now he was a rich man and not a poor man. The boy remembered that in his past life, just before Mr. Wang's lesson, the first nightmarish spectacle began, but now he was not scared. Chen Mu was right, because a notice appeared in front of the class, announcing the start of the mission in the midnight cafeteria. Our hero's classmate turned pale with horror when she saw the terrifying notification with the conditions of the task in front of her. It turned out that the girl had been chosen as a waitress in the midnight canteen, and she had to show up at work before midnight. The red-haired girl was frightened and screamed when she saw the mission from the ghost that appeared before her face. The frightened boys from Chen Mu's class ran out of the room and started screaming for help. The protagonist approached a classmate who began to cry and complain that she didn't want to go to the midnight cafeteria because she didn't want to die. Chen Mu advised her to follow the rules so that there would still be a chance to survive, and those who were late would be wiped off the face of the earth immediately. Trembling with fear, the girl looked pitifully at our hero and remained silent, having listened to his advice. As Chen Mu walked down the corridor, he thought that the midnight canteen would be very useful to him because he already knew about it from his past life. The protagonist grinned and decided that conquering the apocalypse would begin with purchasing a ghostly canteen. The boys from school ran headlong down the street and shouted, with a notice hanging over them saying that those who were late would be erased in 3 seconds. Chen Mu and several of his classmates had already reached the entrance of the cafeteria, and an ominous atmosphere reigned outside. One of our hero's classmates sighed heavily and said in a trembling voice how terrible it all seemed to her. The red-haired girl clung to Chen-mu and asked him to protect her because she was scared. The main character didn't like this. He grimaced in disgust and pushed the young lady away from him with his hand so that she almost fell. The cold-blooded guy asked the woman who she was and told his classmate to stop clinging to him. The red-haired girl blushed with anger and trembled, furious at the guy who refused to protect her. A blonde woman in a business suit appeared before the boys, who in an ominous voice ordered them to be quiet and introduced herself as the manager of the midnight cafeteria. She announced the rules of the canteen, the first of which concerned the staff, who must unquestioningly fulfill the whims of the guests who bring in the canteen's income. The manager also stated that damaging property in the ghostly dining room is prohibited, and violators will be punished. The third rule was that employees were prohibited from leaving the canteen during working hours. Our hero and the others followed the girl into the dining room. The manager first apologized to the guest for the wait. A guest of the dining room appeared before them, sitting with his back to them. A man with long hair asked the waitress why she was frozen. The older man turned around, frowning and ordering the waitress to come closer to him, his eyes glowing red. The blue-haired girl, who saw the guest of the ghostly dining room for the first time, screamed in horror at his appearance. The canteen manager told her to shut up. The girl immediately fell silent and covered her mouth with her hand so as not to make a sound out of fear. The blonde bowed to the guest, apologized to the man, and promised that they would immediately fix everything. The stern manager waved her hand, ordering the canteen guards to take away the girl who had just been screaming. A man with long tousled hair and pointy ears grinned as he ordered the cafeteria staff to serve him dinner. Soon our hero and his classmates completed the task, and there was an abundance of ghostly dishes on the table for the guest. The dining room guest began to devour the dishes served to him with gusto. The first thing he devoured was a purple chicken leg in a disgusting green sauce. The red-haired girl covered her mouth because she felt sick and asked the guest why he was eating this disgusting thing. The man pointed his finger at her and told her to come to him and wipe his mouth, as it was stained with green sauce. The girl turned pale with horror and replied that she did not want to do this because the man and the food he ate disgusted her. Trembling with fear, she grabbed our hero's hand and told Chen-mu to move and finally help her. The protagonist pushed her away again and asked what he had to do with it, since it was she who was asked to help the guest. The girl clenched her teeth and looked down at the floor, her face covered in beads of sweat. She was confused. She nevertheless approached the man and carefully wiped his mouth with a towel, then asked if he was satisfied. The guest was pleased, so he handed the girl a bill with a skull on it and said that it was a tip for her. The red-haired waitress finally broke into a smile, unable to believe she had received such a generous tip from a customer. Her classmates looked with delight at the real ghost coins, because they knew that they were incredibly valuable, and for them even the dead could spare a person. The girl said that one rich man paid a whole million in real money to get 10 phantom coins, and the waitress received that amount just as a tip. The red-haired girl gave our hero a sly look and thought that Chen-mu was probably kicking himself right now, regretting his decision not to help her. The guest in the ghostly dining room finished eating his dish and ordered the waitress to take away the plate, which he had already cleaned to a shine. The girl happily took the plate to serve the respected guest. Now she was not afraid to serve a man. She wanted to take the plate to the kitchen, but on the way she tripped because a guest in the dining room tripped her. The red-haired waitress fell to the floor, and the plate she was carrying in her hands also fell and shattered into small pieces. The man looked at the girl ominously and called her clumsy, and also ordered her to pay for the damaged property. The girl stood up for herself and screamed, accusing the dining room guest of deliberately tripping her up. The newly minted waitress was startled when someone approached her and roughly grabbed her hand, digging sharp black nails into her skin. It was the manager who reminded the waitress that rules are rules, even if the customer is rowdy. Then the girl agreed to pay for the broken plate. The cafeteria manager looked at the girl ominously and asked if she was sure he wanted to pay for the damages. The frightened red-haired waitress replied that she was sure of it and handed the manager the 10 ghost coins she had just received. Chen-mu warned the girl, calling her a fool, that she had just lost her last chance to survive and that she would not leave here alive. Indignant, the girl shouted at the guy to stop talking nonsense because she had already paid for the broken plate. The manager took the money and said that a plate in this cafeteria cost 20 phantom coins, so this note is not enough. The waitress couldn't believe it because, in her world, 10 ghost coins cost 1,000,000 yuan, but the plate turned out to be twice as expensive. With a sinister smile, the cafeteria manager touched the waitress's chin and replied that they didn't care about their human papers. Activating her ghostly purple aura, the evil manager wondered how she could punish the new waitress. The red-haired girl trembled with fear and looked at the manager with fear, repeating that she did not want to die. The dining room guest began to laugh loudly and clap his hands, admitting that he found it very funny to watch human fear. He asked who he should choose next, and the other girls immediately said that they did not want to serve the guest. Noticing our hero's calm, the guest asked the blue-haired boy if he wasn't scared. Chen Mu, who had remained calm all this time, asked the man why he should be afraid of anything. Then the man ordered our hero to quickly take the plate away from here. In exchange, he promised the guy 10 ghost coins. A classmate tried to dissuade Chen Mu, saying that the guest could kill him, but the guy calmed her down, saying that he had a plan. The protagonist approached the man and asked if the guest wanted the guy to simply take the plate from his table. The first thing our hero did was snatch a banknote from the hands of a dining room guest before removing the empty plate from his table. Chen Mu looked at the man with disdain and swung his hand so hard that the plate fell from the table straight onto the floor. The plate, which in the ghostly dining room cost 20 local coins, shattered into tiny pieces. Our hero's classmates and the cafeteria manager were shocked when they saw how brazenly the boy behaved. The protagonist suggested not to delay, but to immediately get down to business, for which he came to the ghostly canteen today. The red-haired girl laughed and shouted that the guy should prepare to die because his money wouldn't be enough to pay compensation either. The manager told Chen Mu to pay for the broken item, but he asked her not to rush and to bring him a portion of tofu. The blonde was perplexed when the protagonist handed her 10 ghost coins to pay for the tofu. Chen Mu grinned and reminded the girl that he was a customer of the canteen, whom the staff had no right to refuse because he was paying money. The guy said that he was now a customer and he was demanding that the canteen manager cancel the compensation. The manager of the ghostly canteen smiled and said that the new customer was a very smart guy. Transforming into a sweet, smiling girl, she bowed before the client and asked if she could know his name. The protagonist replied that the canteen manager was flattering him and introduced himself to her as Chen Mu. The red-haired girl asked the manager what she was doing and demanded that she kill Chen Mu, since he had also broken a plate. The manager explained to Ms. Chen that going against a client meant becoming an enemy of the whole world. Mrs. Chen stared at the manager of the ghost canteen in shock, her brows furrowed in injustice. She immediately began to exclaim that she also wanted to become a client of the ghostly canteen in order to avoid death for a broken plate. The manager crossed her arms over her chest and replied that there would be no second chance for the girl, and they had already discussed everything. Chen Mu's red-haired classmate turned pale with horror and became silent, trying to come to terms with her cruel fate. The canteen manager asked Mr. Chen Mu if he had any other requests. The protagonist demanded that the manager of the canteen call the person who is the most important person in this establishment. Everyone present was stunned when Chen Mu announced that he wanted to buy the ghost canteen. The manager warned the guy that the cafeteria was worth at least several million since its profits had skyrocketed over the past few months. Taking something out of his inside jacket pocket, Chen Mu replied that he was not joking and told the girl to simply find the director for him. The guy pulled a thick wad of phantom money out of his pocket and said that the manager would receive it as a tip. The blonde was shocked when she saw 30,000 ghost coins in front of her. Even the dining room guest was stunned when he saw such a large amount of money in Chen Mu's hands, and the red-haired girl was also shocked. The canteen manager took the money and smiled ominously, because she earns that amount in 2 whole years. The red-haired girl got angry and started yelling at Chen Mu, asking why he didn't help her if he had so much money. Chen Mu replied that he was not obligated to pay for her mistakes because he did not even know the girl. The manager bowed her head to the guy and asked Mr. Chen to wait a little before she brought the food. The protagonist smiled and replied that he would be happy to wait for his food here in the hall. Smiling ominously, the manager looked at the new waitress and said that she would be punished because she had broken the rules of the cafeteria. The red-haired girl extended a trembling hand to our hero and screamed, admitting that she was wrong. In horror, she screamed, begging the protagonist to save her because she didn't want to die, but she was already being dragged across the floor. The canteen manager mercilessly dragged the girl along, holding her by the leg and smiled ominously, her red eyes shining. A guest in the dining room approached our hero and asked his brother not to take his actions to heart. Awkwardly justifying himself to the guy, the man said that he simply drank too much alcohol, which is why he behaved that way. The protagonist looked at the dining room guest with contempt and ordered him to get out of there, not wanting to listen to his excuses. The man replied that he was not a fool and understood the guy, and was not against leaving the dining room right now because he was afraid of Chen Mu. Within a few moments, the dining room guest was at the exit of the establishment, having gotten there as quickly as possible. Our young hero decided to take the place of the previous guest and allowed his other classmates to do the same. At the table, one of the girls asked the guy if they weren't on a deadly mission. The green-haired girl wondered why everything had changed so much as soon as Chen Mu entered the game. After some time, the manager of the ghostly canteen brought a man into the hall who had a powerful, ominous aura. The blonde turned to her boss, whose body was surrounded by streams of red, ominous energy. The canteen manager introduced Mr. Chen Mu to her boss, and our hero looked appraisingly at the director of the establishment. The protagonist did not take his eyes off the boss of the ghostly canteen when he began to speak to him in an ominous voice. A man with pale skin and red, glowing eyes approached Chen Mu to take a closer look at his face. The white-haired, bearded boss of the canteen smiled and asked Chen Mu if he was the one who wanted to buy his establishment. Our young hero confidently answered the director of the ghostly canteen that he wanted to buy the establishment. The boss, sitting down on a chair, told Mr. Chen that he had a brilliant eye, so he could see everything himself. The director stated that the scale and location of this ghostly canteen were the best, although its profits had not been growing recently. The protagonist agreed with the man and added that he also believed in the prospects of this establishment. Chen Mu knew that things had been slow here for the past 2 years, all because of an accident involving one of the minor bosses, but this time, the guy had to take the initiative. The boss of the cafeteria was glad that someone would finally clean up the mess in the cafeteria, and he couldn't pass up the chance to sell the establishment to the guy. The man warned Chen Mu that the price of this establishment was steep and asked if the guy could afford that amount. The protagonist smiled, because this certainly didn't scare him, and asked the canteen director to name his price. The director raised his index finger and declared that Chen Mu would get the canteen if he paid 7 million ghost coins for it. The manager came up and whispered to the boss whether he was going too far and whether their canteen could possibly cost 7 million. The girl asked the director to look at Mr. Chen's face because the guy became thoughtful and silent. The boss immediately regretted asking so much money for the canteen, fearing that Chen Mu would refuse the purchase. The man offered to discuss the price of the establishment with Chen Mu if the amount seemed too high to him, but the guy refused. The protagonist smiled and declared that there was nothing to discuss because he was ready to pay 8 million for the cafeteria right now. The establishment's manager opened her mouth in surprise, and the happy boss asked the guy if he was joking. Chen Mu assured the boss that he was not joking, but he had one condition, since he would pay an additional 1 million ghost coins. The director of the ghostly canteen was happy to listen to any condition from the generous buyer. The protagonist declared that all the staff of the ghost canteen should remain here, and no one should be fired. The manager of the ghost canteen was visibly happy to hear this and asked Chen Mu if he really wanted to leave them. The man thought that he didn't care at all who stayed here and who left, because he himself would get out of here the first thing after the sale. Smiling and blushing, the boss replied to Chen Mu that he could take the entire staff of the canteen along with the establishment. His eyes sparkled with happiness, and the boss wondered how long it would take Chen Mu to collect such a sum, and how soon the contract would be ready. Snapping his fingers, the protagonist replied that the deal had to be completed today, and he preferred cash. The canteen director was shocked when, with a snap of Chen Mu's fingers, a whole mountain of phantom bills appeared on the table. The man with the gray beard was jubilant and couldn't believe his luck because Chen Mu had laid out all 8 million at once. The boss flattered Chen Mu, saying that he knew how to run a business and handed him a contract and a pen to sign. Beaming with happiness, the man asked Mr. Chen to sign a contract so that the canteen would become his property. The protagonist took a pen and put his signature under the handwritten text confirming his part of the deal. Chen Mu's mouth dropped open in surprise as the piece of paper began to emit a bright purple light. The boss asked him not to worry because this was simply the force of the rules, and now no one could take the canteen away from Chen Mu. A stream of bright purple energy surrounded our hero's hand, and he felt this force of power with his body. The protagonist felt that this ghostly dining hall, as well as the epic spatial ring, were now connected to him. Chen Mu was glad that from today on, all the proceeds from the canteen would belong only to him. The previous owner of the canteen was pleased that he not only got rid of the establishment, but also of the entire staff. Chen Mu had a smile on his face because he had acquired an establishment that would be worth tens of billions in the future. Both parties to the deal were in a huge profit, so the men smiled and shook hands in a friendly manner. The previous director put all the ghost coins into a bag and left, wishing Mr. Chen prosperity. Our young hero, looking at the cafeteria manager, declared that he wanted to change the rules of the establishment since he was its new boss. The cafeteria manager was happy to have a new boss and replied that the guy could easily change whatever he wanted here. The first thing the new owner of the canteen noticed was the clock hanging on the wall, which showed 12 hours 29 minutes. The guy stated that the first rule was that this terrible mission was to be completed in a minute. He turned to his frightened classmates and said that they could now safely return home. The girls were delighted and thanked Chen Mu, saying that if it weren't for him, they definitely wouldn't have gotten out of there alive. Afterwards, Chen Mu told the manager to call all the canteen staff here because the general meeting would start in 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, the entire staff lined up in front of the new boss. Our hero introduced himself to them as Chen Mu and explained the situation. The protagonist announced to the staff of the ghostly canteen that from today on he would be in command here. The employees didn't react to this in any way because they didn't care what kind of boss they had since they were just slaves here anyway. Chen Mu said he knew what debts their previous boss owed to his employees and promised not to be such a bad director. The guy pulled out a whole mountain of phantom bills from the ring's storage and declared that he would pay the employees their entire salary right then and there. The staff was delighted and turned pink when they saw at least hundreds of thousands of ghostly coins in front of them. Now the faces of the cafeteria staff were beaming with smiles, and they were ready to continue listening to the instructions of the new boss. Chen Mu promised to pay the employees the same amount every 7 months if they continued to do their jobs well. The employees rejoiced and called the new boss a god. Some of them were happy that they would finally be able to save up for their wedding. The main character was also smiling because he had so easily made all the staff happy and solved all the problems with wages. Soon, the guy came out of the ghostly canteen, and all the employees came outside to wave him goodbye. Although defeating the Midnight Canteen had given him a bonus, Chen Mu's strength was still barely up to the level of a ghost soldier, and he knew it. The protagonist realized that he risked dying again at any moment if he encountered a more powerful monster. Chen Mu decided that the first thing he needed to do was get some protective equipment as soon as possible. The guy was surprised when he saw a taxi passing by in front of him, because it was already very late outside. Without thinking, Chen Mu walked up to the stopped purple car and pulled the handle to get into the back passenger seat. The protagonist got into a suspicious taxi and told the driver to take him to the Wangjiang district. Behind the wheel of the taxi sat not a man, but a skeleton with green shining eyes, who did not respond to the guy's words. The driver of the strange taxi didn't say anything to the passenger, and Chen Mu also remained silent, waiting for the car to move. The skeleton pressed the gas pedal so hard that the car accelerated to its maximum speed, and the speedometer needle shot up sharply. The protagonist became tense because the speed at which they were traveling was too high. The guy became even more wary when he smelled blood in the cabin, which meant the taxi was definitely not an ordinary one. Chen Mu was convinced that something was definitely wrong with this strange taxi when he saw a bloody handprint on the glass. He winced in horror as he realized he was in a ghost taxi, and this was yet another horrible apocalypse scenario. The purple car continued to speed down the road, emitting the ominous aura of a dead man with emerald eyes. The protagonist from his past life knew very well that in this terrible apocalypse people faced 3 main dangers. The first one is a mission like the Midnight Canteen, because a person has to work hard to get out of the establishment alive. The second danger of the apocalypse is evil spirits that lure you into a trap, pretending to be ordinary people. The third danger, according to Chen Mu, is the most insidious, because a person himself does not understand when he is already inside a nightmare. The protagonist knew firsthand that it was already too late to do anything once you realized where you were. Luckily, in his past life, the guy had heard about the rules of the ghost taxi, and it involves certain death if a person does not have the money to pay for the ride. Chen Mu knew that if you didn't have enough money, you just had to jump out of the car before it got going. And a person who is not just poor, but also stupid, will inevitably die if he accidentally gets into this midnight taxi. But Chen Mu wasn't afraid of this, because for now he was safe from other ghosts due to the car's speed, and he had money. The guy grinned and already started planning how to get this car into his own ownership. Soon, the purple midnight taxi arrived at the gate leading to the Wangjiang district at high speed. The skull-headed driver turned around and demanded that Chen Mu pay him a full 10,000 ghost coins for the ride. Even though Chen Mu had that kind of money, he crossed his arms and began to complain that 10,000 was too expensive. The driver smiled ominously and warned the passenger that he would be harsh with him if he did not have that amount. Chen Mu grinned and said that he could immediately see the driver's experience because he was cutting through the city at such a speed without seeing. The driver extended a black-gloved hand toward Chen Mu and demanded that he shut up and pay for the ride, or else he would die. The protagonist grabbed the ghost by the wrist and asked who said that he was not ready to pay for the trip. The guy threw a whole wad of phantom bills on the seat and asked the driver if he would risk taking the money. Beads of sweat ran down his skull. The driver went quiet because he certainly didn't expect this kid to have 10,000. He trembled when Chen Mu reminded him of the rules of the ghost taxi because the guy could now calmly get out of the car after paying. Chen Mu exposed the driver, saying that he had covered the meter with his body and announced a huge amount, hoping to scare the guy. The guy asked if the driver was simply confident that the passenger didn't have that kind of money and that he could legally steal from him. The confused driver didn't understand where this guy came from, because the apocalypse began a couple of months ago, and he already knew the rules of all the scenarios. The protagonist, seeing the meter, accused the driver of greed, since the fare only cost 10 phantom coins. The ghost with the skull for a head told the guy to stop talking, pay for the ride, and get out of the car. Taking a wad of ghostly bills, Chen Mu asked the driver not to rush and asked if the ghost wanted to get the money. The driver asked if the passenger was really ready to give him the money just like that, even if he wanted it. The ghost was shocked when Chen Mu happily gave him the money and promised to give him another 10,000 on top. The taxi owner turned pink with joy and lost his sinister expression because Chen Mu's money power had such an effect on him. Chen Mu promised that the driver would earn more every month and would receive the 20,000 if he fulfilled his conditions. The driver looked at the protagonist with hope and asked what conditions he would have to fulfill. The protagonist offered him to become his personal driver and promised to give him a bonus if he completed the task. The ghost was tormented by doubts because he had been working for a whole month for 3,000, and here he was being offered as much as 20,000 ghost coins. A moment later, 5 whole stacks of phantom bills appeared on the seat as our hero snapped his fingers to retrieve them from the vault. The ghost's eyes lit up when he saw such money, and without thinking, he agreed to accept Chen Mu's offer. The protagonist offered Wang Guishi to sign a contract so that starting tomorrow he would become his personal driver. Wang Guishi handed the boss a contract and a special phone that he could use to call the driver so that he would show up immediately. The driver understood that he must now serve his new boss properly and never let such a generous man go. The protagonist took the contract and gave the driver his first task: to pick up the guy from here tomorrow at 10 in the morning. The driver, beaming with happiness, shouted that the boss could always rely on him, so the guy could rest easy. The next morning arrived in the Wanji area, and compared to the apocalyptic night, the atmosphere was normal. Chen Mu chewed bread while looking out the window, thinking about how quickly the anomalous zones that ordinary people avoided were spreading. Looking at his ring, the guy decided that he should take advantage of this opportunity to get ahead and take an advantageous position in life. He sighed heavily, realizing that in the new world everything was decided by brute force, and with his current skills he couldn't handle apocalyptic scenarios. Chen Mu's mood improved when he remembered that there was a fog museum nearby. Our hero knew that the owner of this museum, Duke William, was equal in strength to the ghostly general, and that many powerful spirits were under his command. Duke William also has an artifact, the Delta Heavy Armor, which protects a person from most damage. The guy sighed heavily, because completing the mission would not give him the opportunity to get this armor. He could only get it personally from the Duke. Wandering around the house from side to side, Chen Mu remembered that Duke William was currently suffering from a lack of finances. Although Duke William tries to remain an elegant man, he spent almost all of his money on a woman. The protagonist laughed happily because he had plenty of ghost coins, and bribing the Duke was not a problem. The boy was distracted from his thoughts about Duke William when someone rang the doorbell of his apartment. Opening the door, he saw Wang Guishi in front of him and noted his punctuality. The driver replied that this was a basic skill for every personal driver. Wang Guishi also decided to treat his boss to breakfast, thinking he was hungry, and handed him some fresh baguettes and coffee. Outside, Guishi carefully opened the car door for the boss, still thinking about the cash bonus from Chen Mu. In the car, Chen Mu asked his driver if there was a shopping mall nearby where he could buy gifts for the ghosts. The driver guessed that the boss, with his status, wanted to go to a luxury shopping mall, and Chen Mu confirmed his guess. Wang Guishi said that in the suburbs there is an abandoned shopping center that specializes in selling premium goods. The protagonist was delighted and asked Old Man Guishi to take him there because that was exactly what he needed. The driver put his hands on the steering wheel and told the boss to hold on tight because the car was about to start moving. Wang Guishi's purple taxi began to speed down the city street, ignoring the signs on the asphalt prohibiting driving faster than 80 kilometers per hour. Chen Mu enjoyed the ride because he didn't expect his new driver to be so proactive. Soon, the purple car pulled into an unsightly alley and stopped, surrounded by old high-rise buildings. The protagonist looked out the window and asked Old Man Guishi if they had already arrived at the right place. When Chen Mu got out of the car, he saw in front of him an old, abandoned, tall building with cracks on its facade. The boy told the driver to stay outside and promised to return when he finished shopping in the ghost mall. Wang Guishi was already reluctant to leave the ghost taxi because he was at the level of a soldier rank spirit. He knew he wouldn't be of any use if he went with the boss and some real danger came his way. But Wang Guishi was happy that he could help his boss escape from trouble in his taxi car, in which Chen Mu would definitely be safe. The driver was pleased with himself and thought that his idea of rescuing his boss with a car was simply amazing. Inside the shopping mall, Chen Mu noticed how cold it was even though it was summer outside, making him think that he was in an apocalyptic scenario again. The guy concluded that this shopping center had already absorbed the souls of many unlucky idiots, because the walls were covered in bloody marks. The protagonist stopped and frowned at the man who stood before him in the corridor of the shopping center. It was a girl with sharp fangs who smiled slyly, greeted the visitor, and asked what he wanted to buy. The guy came closer to her and, without showing fear, asked if he really had ended up in a dirty shopping center. The employee grabbed his arm and warned him not to even think about escaping, because he would only be able to leave if he bought something. The main character smiled slyly and assumed that the girl had just announced the rules of this shopping center. The blonde confirmed that these were the rules and asked the new client to spend the money here as quickly as possible. The guy frowned and told the girl to stop trying to pull these tricks on him because he knew that he could leave even if he didn't buy anything. The employee started sweating and asked the protagonist how he knew this, because she knew the guy was right. Chenmu smiled and told the girl that he had encountered such situations many times in the past. According to him, the rule about mandatory purchase in a shopping center is actually wrong. People who come here for the first time choose any product to buy in order to leave this place as soon as possible. As a result, the frightened person does not have enough money to pay for it, which violates the main rule of the shopping center. The only option left for such an unfortunate customer is to be eaten by a ghost who was posing as a store employee. But breaking out of this vicious circle, according to Chenmu, is very easy, because the rules allow you to leave the shopping center without paying. The protagonist stated that the store employee would not be able to do anything to him, even if he just turned around and left right now. The mall employee froze and stared at the new customer because, surprisingly, the guy knew the rules. Bearing her sharp claws, the girl called our hero very smart and agreed that many people fell into the trap of these rules. She allowed Chenmu to leave since he already knew how to get out of here alive and promised that she would not stop him. The main character spread his arms out to the sides and asked why he should leave here, since he came to spend money. The girl grimaced and looked at the client with disbelief, because she did not believe that he had ghost coins. Chenmu smiled and asked the mall employee to take him to the counter with the most high-end goods. The employee asked if the guy could really afford to buy anything here, since the price of their goods starts at 10,000 phantom coins. The protagonist took out several wads of bills from the vault and cleared his ears with his finger, pretending that the wind was too loud and he did not hear the girl. The blonde's eyes lit up when she saw the money, and she immediately agreed to take the guy to the 6th floor, where the most high-end goods were sold. Chenmu said he was in a hurry and asked her to take him there as quickly as possible, and he left the 20,000 phantom bills as a tip for the employee. The blonde girl took the wealthy client by the hand and smiled, politely escorting the guy to the 6th floor. When she brought him to the right place, the girl told him that all the luxury brands of the ghost world were collected here. The protagonist understood that he had to take Duke William's taste into account if he wanted to win his trust. Chenmu knew that houses where aristocrats lived were often equipped with wine cabinets, so he walked over to the shelves with the wine bottles. From a past life, our hero remembered that one of Duke William's dreams was to collect a collection of high-quality red wine. When he turned around, Chenmu bumped into another mall employee, a girl with blonde hair. She asked the guy what kind of wine he would like to buy and stated that all the products in their store were handcrafted, taking into account the tastes of ghosts. Smiling sweetly, the girl actually couldn't wait to turn Chenmu into her dinner, just like the previous foolish customers who didn't have enough money. Chenmu picked up one of the bottles and said that he wanted to buy 100 of the most expensive bottles of wine in this store, and the packaging should also be the most luxurious. The employee was convinced that she was dealing with an idiot who simply wanted to pay for the wine with ordinary human currency. The bags of wine were already in front of our hero. The girl announced that Chenmu needed to pay 23 million for all of this. The girl added that Chenmu could leave his head in this store as collateral if he did not have money. The protagonist asked not to scare him, because he had enough money to pay, and the entire amount appeared in front of them. The employee laughed and clarified that the guy needed to pay with ghost coins, not regular money. Chenmu took one of the bundles of phantom bills and asked the girl if she really thought he would pay with normal money. The girl's mouth dropped open in surprise, because the apocalypse had begun a month ago, and the guy couldn't have earned so many ghost coins during that time. The shopping mall employee looked closely at the pile of money, and Chenmu asked if she confirmed its authenticity. She asked the gentleman to wait here for a while because the presence of a manager was required to carry out such a massive transaction. The protagonist was dissatisfied and asked the consultant to hurry up because he still had a lot of things to do. The girl ran to the manager and shouted that one customer had purchased 100 bottles of high-quality wine with one receipt. Sun Xiang, the mall manager, adjusted her glasses and asked if the employee had mistaken a genuine customer for a fool who decided to use human currency to pay for a purchase. The employee replied that she had checked everything and that there were indeed 20 million real phantom coins downstairs, so the manager should quickly come down and check. When Song Xiang opened the door and saw a mountain of stacks of money on the table, she was stunned because they were indeed ghost coins. The shopping center manager's mood improved. The girl smiled and straightened her gray jacket. Beaming with joy, Song Xiang adjusted her short red hair before meeting with a wealthy client. She knelt before him and apologized for making Chenmu wait for so long, and also politely asked his name. The main character did not tell the shopping center manager his name, but only his last name. The manager handed the guy a gold card and congratulated him on becoming their first gold client, as he had spent over 20 million ghost coins here. The guy stopped her and asked her to stop worrying so much because he had not finished shopping here yet. A dumbfounded Song. Song adjusted her glasses and asked if the customer really wanted to buy something else here. Chen-mu stood up, smiled, and replied that these 100 bottles of the most expensive red wine were just the beginning. Delighted, the manager offered to show the client all the products they had in stock if he needed anything else. The protagonist asked her not to worry and simply ordered her to bring the most expensive jewelry available for sale. Song Shang was so stunned that she started to faint because this client was inhumanly rich. She presented him with a diamond necklace that cost 1 million phantom coins, and it was the most expensive piece of jewelry in the store. The protagonist glanced at the offered jewelry and asked the employee to pack the necklace for him. A satisfied smile appeared on his face because he was going to present this gift to the Duchess, believing that such a beautiful necklace would suit her perfectly. The guy also decided to buy several pairs of watches, which he told the employees of the Ghost Shopping Center. The manager replied that all these watches would cost him another 1,000,000 ghost coins and asked him to wait while they packed everything up. Chen-mu thought about why he shouldn't buy this shopping mall right now, since it would only become more expensive in the future. Therefore, the main character asked if the director was there, because he would like to talk to him in person. Manager Song Shang's mouth dropped open in surprise when she heard that Chen-mu wanted to buy the shopping mall and become her boss instead of her client. She apologized to him because their leader was currently on a business trip, and she had no right to decide such issues without him. Chen-mu listened to her, smiled, and replied that then there was only one way to resolve this issue right now. Song smiled sweetly and offered Mr. Chen a supreme black gold card for him, if he had such a need. The protagonist asked if this card would give him any privileges as a client. The girl explained that with this card he would be able to modify the rules of the mission in the shopping center at his own discretion. The manager also said that employees would clear a path for him through the shopping center in advance if he wanted to walk. Chen-mu agreed to accept the card and also asked Song Shang to issue him 50 gift cards worth 5,000 ghost coins each. Song Shang politely handed the customer a black card and gave him 50 gift certificates as a gift. The satisfied protagonist thanked the shopping center manager very much for receiving such a nice bonus for free. Chen-mu activated his epic spatial ring to suck all the items purchased in the store into the storage. The manager was shocked because the guy owned this valuable artifact at such a young age, which meant he definitely had an interesting past. The main character suggested finishing for today because he needed to leave already. He still had a lot to do. All the mall employees lined up in front of him and bowed before him, saying goodbye to the supreme black gold customer. Wang Guishi was stunned when he learned that his boss had received a black card, as acquiring it required spending tens of millions of ghost coins in the store. The driver got out of the car, opened the door for his boss, and asked him to get in the car. When they both got into the car, Wang Guishi turned around and asked the boss where they were going now. The main character asked the driver not to rush, and he handed him a small red box. Wang Guishi took the box and looked at it with a puzzled expression, asking Boss Chen what was inside. Chen-mu smiled and explained that it was a gift for him, and he should open the box and see if he liked it. The ghost was shocked when he opened the red box and saw the gift. His face was blinded by a bright golden light. It turned out that the boss had decided to give him Constantine's zombie watch, and Wang Guishi knew this model very well. Old man Guishi burst into tears and told the boss that he could not accept the gift because it was too valuable. Chen-mu laughed and insisted that the driver accept the gift, and also promised many more such bonuses in the future if he performed well. Wang Guishi remembered his previous employers who treated him only as a workhorse. The driver realized that Mr. Chen was completely different from them. He was not only a kind, but also a generous boss. Without holding back his tears, Wang Guishi promised himself that from now on, he would follow Chen-mu for the rest of his life and carry out all his orders. The protagonist asked the driver not to be too happy and told him to take him to the Foggy Museum. Wang Guishi immediately stepped on the gas pedal, and the purple ghost taxi moved off, leaving behind clouds of dust. When it was already dark outside, the car in which Chen-mu was sitting was still racing along the road. Now they were already outside the city. Chen-mu only thought that he needed to obtain the heavy death armor, and his meticulous preparation should help him achieve this. Soon the purple car finally stopped, and all around there was only darkness and a dense pine forest. Old man Guishi happily informed his boss that they had already arrived at the right place. Chen-mu got out of the car and told the driver to find a place nearby to rest, and he would come back when he was done. A crowd of people had already gathered at the gates of the Foggy Museum. Among them were two young guys, a girl and a fat man. The fair-haired guy looked at our hero and noticed that another person had arrived for the mission. He asked Chen-mu if he had also received the mission notification, and the second suggested that our hero team up with the three of them to increase their chances of survival. The protagonist walked past the two guys indifferently, telling them that he was not interested in their offer. Chen Mu from his previous life knew very well that in the apocalypse, one should not get involved with strangers. Otherwise, one could die through no fault of one's own at any moment. The guys got angry at our hero, considering his behavior too arrogant. They warned him that he would die alone. The girl clung to her man and complained that this mission was too scary and she was afraid, but he reassured her because he brought rare ghost coins with him. The man with the mustache was counting on these 10 phantom coins, which he had bought the day before for a whole 8 million human money. The girl looked at the man lovingly and confessed her love to him, expressing hope that he would not leave her. The fat man smiled and replied that he would not leave her if she obeyed him, and after the mission, he even promised to divorce her and marry her. Overhearing the conversation between the couple in love, Chen Mu was surprised because he didn't think that this fat man would be able to get the ghost coins. The man became angry when he saw Chen Mu staring at him and shouted, asking why he was doing this and whether he had never seen rich people. Suddenly, an ominous voice greeted all the mission participants in the Foggy Museum, after which it was announced that they would visit the estate of Duke William. The gates of the Foggy Museum opened. Chen Mu and the rest of the participants of the nightmarish mission entered the territory. An ominous voice asked the mission participants to enjoy the banquet that Duke William had prepared for them. The guy with green hair approached the door of the Foggy Museum first to open the doors and go inside. As soon as the door opened slightly, black streaks of ominous energy flew out from it. Ron, Duke William's butler, appeared before the boys and invited the new guests to come inside. The entire castle, known as the Fog Museum, was surrounded by an ominous energy, and the building was shrouded in purple fog. The protagonist and the others entered the building. The butler Ron, an elderly man with a thick mustache, stood humbly in front of them. The boys flinched when they saw this butler, because they saw a ghost instead of an ordinary man. Ron looked scary. The girl asked Haya if this butler would eat them while they walked through the museum, and he followed them. Ron was outraged, but he didn't show it because the museum guests had no manners and didn't even bring gifts for Duke William. The butler's attention was drawn to a guy who, unlike the others, looked friendly and was smiling. It was Chen Mu. Ron walked up to him and asked why he hadn't come in yet, warning him that he didn't want to waste his time on a living dead man like him. The protagonist smiled broadly and assumed that the man standing in front of him was the same butler of Duke William. A surprised Ron confirmed his suspicions and told him to go to the hall and not stand there like a statue. Chen Mu took out a small red box from the ring storage and announced that he wanted to give the butler a gift. Butler Ron was shocked when he saw that this guest was in possession of an epic spatial ring. Our hero apologized to Ron and asked him to accept the gift, explaining that he was visiting this museum for the first time. The old man with a mustache appreciated the guy's gesture. He was glad that he finally had a guest with manners in front of him. The protagonist expressed hope that he would like the gift because he was afraid of disappointing the butler if he chose something wrong. Butler Ron was shocked when he opened the box and saw a ghostly watch worth 300,000 coins. The man assumed that Chen Mu had accidentally given him the wrong gift because he was just a butler and not Duke William. Chen Mu explained that it was a gift for the butler because he admired the man who had served the Duke for half his life. The butler laughed and replied that, in that case, he would accept this gift as a sign of respect for the guest. Ron stated that, even though he was a butler, he had some authority in the museum, so Chen Mu could be sure that he would leave here alive. The protagonist was secretly jubilant because he had only spent a couple of 100,000 ghost coins on a gift in exchange for immunity. The old man asked Chen Mu if the other guests were friends of our hero and if they also needed special care. Chen Mu grinned and honestly admitted to the butler that he was completely unfamiliar with the other mission participants. The butler asked our hero to go into the hall and take part in a small game that would take place before the Duke's banquet. The protagonist entered the main hall of the museum, a spacious room with 3 spiral staircases leading to the balcony. The girl pressed herself against Hai, trembling all over, and complained that she was very afraid and that the man should not leave her field of vision. Hai was displeased when he saw that this kid, Chen Mu, for some reason managed to become such good friends with the ghost butler. The protagonist sat down on the sofa, and the butler Ron brought him a glass of tea on a tray, treating him like a special guest. The 2 boys envied Chen Mu. Now they were not surprised why our hero acted so arrogantly before. The butler addressed all the guests and announced that the banquet was still being prepared, so they would take part in a game of hide-and-seek organized by Duke William. A playful smile appeared on the protagonist's face, as he was already looking forward to starting the mission. Ron stated that the game would last 2 hours, during which time no one would be allowed to leave the first floor, and that any violators would be wiped off the face of the earth. According to the second rule of the game, the guards will act as hunters. They must not be seen, otherwise the mission participant will die. The third rule states that all objects on the ground floor except the walls and floor belong to Duke William. The butler warned that anyone who dared to touch or move the Duke's property would be punished. Old Ron bowed to the participants of the game and wished each of them good luck, announcing that hide-and-seek would begin soon. The fat man and his girlfriend trembled with fear and cold. The room suddenly became cold, and the man suggested that his beloved hide somewhere. The blonde was horrified when he realized that they couldn't hide in the closets because touching the Duke's property was forbidden. The green-haired boy grabbed his head and screamed, realizing that these bastards definitely didn't want them to survive. Chen-mu looked at the vase and thought that he should use his death release medallion to find a way to pass the mission. The atmosphere on the first floor of the foggy museum became even more ominous. The purple streams of energy became thicker. The guards of the foggy museum appeared in the middle of the spacious hall, playing the role of hunters in hide-and-seek. The girl, who was hiding nearby, screamed in fear when she saw the bloody, scary ghosts in front of her. Hai couldn't take it anymore and slapped his lady, telling her to shut up because she might attract the attention of the ghosts. The angry man asked the girl if she really wanted to be discovered since she was screaming so loudly. He and his beloved hid behind a transparent display case, so the hunter discovered them very quickly. The girl looked back at the ghostly hunter with fear in her eyes and prayed that he wouldn't miraculously find her. When the hunter stepped aside and turned his head, he still noticed the girl and Hai's brother, who had fallen silent behind the display case. The ghost was jubilant when he approached the loving couple and announced that he had found them, and they did not even notice his appearance. When Hai saw the ghost hunter standing in front of him, he trembled and screamed in terror. The man pushed his beloved straight into the hunter's arms, and he himself stood up and ran to escape the ghost. The girl, who could no longer hold back her tears, screamed at the man not to leave her, but he didn't even turn around. The ghost turned away and ran in the other direction too. The girl did not understand why the hunter did not take her life. The second guard of the foggy museum, meanwhile, discovered the guys who didn't even have time to hide somewhere. One of them ordered the other to distract the hunter while he went around from behind and found a way to attack from behind. The fair-haired mission participant, although his whole body was shaking with fear, shouted at the ghost, provoking it to attack him. The boy grabbed the hunter by the arms and shouted to his friend to attack the ghost from behind, with a stick as quickly as possible. The hunter, with a skull instead of a head, stunned the idiot by saying that his friend had already run away a long time ago. The ghost was already ready to attack the guy, and he screamed and complained about Xiaozhan, who betrayed his savior. The green-haired boy simply ran away, listening to his friend's screams, because he had survived his entire life only through betrayal. The protagonist was calm. He was still thinking about the rule that forbids touching or moving the Duke's property. Chen-mu finally realized that the way to pass this mission and survive was hidden in the thing that was in this hall. Seeing the ghost hunter, the guy grinned mysteriously and decided to test his theory on him. A hunter with shining eyes spotted our hero and advised the boy to give up and just die quietly. The main character was not at all afraid of the ghost, but smiled and invited the hunter to come closer to him. The ghost hunter warned Chen-mu that he was going to take his life if he did not escape immediately. Chen-mu replied to the ghost that he would be wiped off the face of the earth if he dared to touch our hero. The puzzled security guard of the foggy museum asked the guy what kind of nonsense he was talking about and why he suddenly had to die. The protagonist explained that, according to the rule, anyone who touches an object in this room will be punished. According to him, he himself is an exhibit in the museum because he is not going to move from his place, like the other objects. Smiling broadly, the boy, confident in his theory, asked the hunter if he was still going to touch him. The ghost hunter flinched because he didn't expect this guy to reveal the rules of the mission in the museum so quickly. The museum security guard decided that he couldn't increase his productivity at the expense of our hero, so he'd better find other participants in the mission. The disappointed ghost simply turned around and left, without even touching the protagonist. Chen-mu finally breathed a sigh of relief because his theory was correct and the ghost did not dare to attack him. But someone present still dared to touch our hero, frightening him when he put his hand on his shoulder. The protagonist immediately became wary and asked who did it, carefully looking behind him. It turned out that it was another butler from the foggy museum who brought Mr. Chen fresh tea. Chen-mu let out a sigh because just a second ago he thought that his theory about how to complete the mission correctly had failed. The butler explained that Duke William had told him to bring his guest hot tea because it was very cold in the room. According to the butler, Ron also allowed Chen-mu to leave this mission at any time if he became bored. When the guy with glasses snapped his fingers, a red leather sofa appeared in front of Chen-mu, ready to relax on. The protagonist decided not to abandon the mission, replying that he had already found a way to complete it. The girl, who was still hiding behind the display case, watched our hero. She didn't expect the guy to be so influential. She smiled slyly as the idea of clinging to Chen-mu to get out of the foggy museum alive crept into her head. The girl immediately rushed to Chen-mu, who was sitting on the sofa, and complained to the handsome man that she was very scared. She knelt down in front of him and looked at the guy with pleading eyes, asking if he could protect her. Chenmu frowned and replied that she should quickly return to her fat man instead of crawling on her knees in front of him. The girl asked the protagonist to stop being so cold-blooded and promised to do everything he said. The guy advised her to quickly hide in a safe corner because he didn't want her blood to stain her clothes. The other mission member was angry because he had taken a lot of risks for survival and even betrayed his friend, while Chenmu was sitting there so calmly. He envied Chenmu, who was just relaxing on the sofa, while girls were crawling on their knees in front of him. The guy decided to approach our hero and offered to work on the team, trying to convince him that he valued loyalty. Chenmu suggested that the boy should cooperate with this girl because at least they could warm each other up. Smiling ominously, the green-haired boy invited the girl to come with him, promising to even hold the sky on his shoulders for her if it fell. The girl looked at our hero angrily, concluding that Chenmu had finally decided not to help her. She looked innocently at the green-haired boy and declared that she was ready to trust him this time. The guy noticed the appearance of the guards and shouted, warning his new comrade that the ghosts were already approaching. He grabbed her hand sharply and shouted for her to follow him immediately, and the girl didn't mind. They ran away, and Chenmu was amazed by the naivety of the girl who had just been betrayed and decided to trust her life to the first person she met again. At this time, Butler Ron was admiring the gift that Chenmu had given him. He admired the handcraft and material of the watch. The old man was delighted and said that this watch was truly worthy of being called a luxurious piece of jewelry. The waiter approached the butler and reported that hot tea had been delivered for the esteemed guest. The butler asked if he had already spoken to the guards, because they had better not touch their esteemed guest, Mr. Chen. The guy with glasses smiled and replied that Chenmu had already found a way to pass the mission, so there was no need for that. Old Ron jumped up and screamed because the game had just started, and our hero had already found a quick way to win. He concluded that Mr. Chen had great wisdom, since before he had thought of him as just a rich guy who wanted to buy victory. The butler didn't understand why Chenmu was participating in such low-level missions, despite having such courage and wit. The man sighed heavily and felt sad because he had previously judged this noble soul, and decided that Mr. Chen was now his friend. He shouted, ordering the waiter to bring Chen some fruit slices, and move the sofa that was usually occupied by the butler to a better position. Soon the waiter approached our hero again, this time bringing the guy a plate of sliced fruit. There were 10 minutes left in the game, and Chenmu knew full well that the hunters would deal with the survivors in the final minutes. The hunter warned the second ghost not to even think about touching Mr. Chen, otherwise they would both be fired. The second ghost told his partner, in that case, to hurry up and catch the other 3 participants because they had not yet fulfilled their quota. Through the speaker, the game participants heard a message that there were only 10 minutes left until the end of the mission. The guy with green hair asked the girl if she wanted to reward him somehow for protecting her all this time. The girl replied to Zhao that he really was the most reliable and courageous person here. Zhao, flushed from the compliments, agreed, believing that no one here could even compare to him. But he didn't even notice that there was a hunter behind him. He only found out when the girl screamed, warning him. The green-haired boy frowned and immediately turned around to see who dared to approach them. He saw in front of him a hunter with a skull instead of a head, who discovered Zhao and the girl in the last minutes of the game. The girl and her new protector simultaneously screamed in horror as the terrifying ghost began to rapidly close the distance. Zhao decided to betray again for his own survival. He pushed the girl away from him and rushed forward, trying to escape from the hunter. The girl screamed in horror, calling the guy a bastard who also dared to betray her, just like the previous man. Trembling with fear, the girl began to beg the ghost hunter to leave her alive, promising to do anything. The ghostly guard of the Foggy Museum apologized to her and stated that all he wanted from her was her life. The merciless hunter grabbed the girl so that she could no longer escape, and this was the tragic end of her participation in the game. The game finally ended. Zhao and Hai breathed a sigh of relief, and in the end, only 3 people survived. Hai didn't understand where the justice was, because they had been surviving as best they could for 2 hours, and only Chenmu was sitting and enjoying his tea. Zhao was also indignant, not understanding why Chenmu had completed this task so easily, since the mission was the same for everyone. The protagonist was not surprised that 2 people did not complete the mission, because the probability of survival in it was 50%. Ron the butler appeared before the survivors and announced the end of the game of hide-and-seek. He expressed the hope that everyone had a good time. Hai and Zhao frowned and stared at Ron the butler with dissatisfied expressions, because they clearly didn't like the game. The old man with the mustache asked the guests to follow him to the 2nd floor, as Duke William had prepared a banquet for them. Chenmu was glad that he would finally see Duke William, and if he could gain his favor, the heavy death armor would be in his pocket. The protagonist, Ron, Hai, and Zhao came to the dining room. In front of them there was a long table, which was already ready for dinner. The butler announced the rule that during the banquet it was forbidden to behave rudely towards Duke William and his madam. According to the 2nd rule, guests must eat absolutely all the dishes that are served to them, Otherwise, they will be punished. The butler invited our hero to sit right next to Duke William, and Chen Mu thanked the man for his concern. Chen Mu and the others sat down in their seats. Only Hai was trembling violently with fear, but the butler still suggested that they begin dinner. Soon, Duke William himself appeared in the hall and greeted everyone. The general was accompanied by his beloved. Duke William, as the host of the banquet, sat at the head of the table. He made a gesture with his hand to signal the butler. The man shouted to one of his subjects to begin serving food to their esteemed guests. The bespectacled waiter brought the first course and stood between Hai and Zhao, causing the men to become wary. Zhao was outraged because he saw rotten, stinking meat on the plate. He shouted that this food was absolutely not suitable for people. The steak smelled so bad that Hai turned green with nausea, not understanding what the hell they were served on the plate. Duke William smiled and said that he wanted to share the food among all the guests to show his sincerity. Chen Mu apologized to the Duke for interfering, as he had decided to give William a small gift. William was genuinely happy because he regularly welcomed guests, and finally someone had arrived who showed manners. The Duke looked at our hero with loving eyes because he was struck by his generous behavior. He became even more interested in Chen Mu when he noticed the epic spatial ring on his finger. Wooden painted boxes miraculously appeared on the table in front of both Duke William and his madam. The protagonist asked Duke William and Madame Emily to open these boxes to look at their gifts. At first, Duke William thought the gift was mediocre because the wooden box looked inexpensive. The disappointed man sighed heavily and decided that people really did have no tact. When Duke William opened the box, his mouth dropped open in surprise to see a limited edition Danton zombie watch in front of him. Madame Emily was also delighted with the gift, as she received a crystal necklace that she could not afford to buy herself. The protagonist asked the Duke and his madam to do him the honor of accepting these small gifts. Duke William praised our hero's politeness and asked Madame Emily to personally serve the dish to Chen Mu. Chen Mu didn't mind Madame Emily making sure there was special food on our hero's table. Pleased with the gift, Madame Emily clapped her hands and asked the butlers to bring a fruit pie for our hero. The man with the mustache was taken aback when he saw that the waiter brought Chen Mu not spoiled food, but a delicious pie. The protagonist thanked the Duke for his hospitality, and he was glad that Chen Mu was pleased. Hai finally realized that he, like Chen Mu, could bribe the Duke and Madame if he gave them gifts too. He was confident that the Duke and Madame would treat him as their most valued guest when he handed them his phantom coins. The man with the mustache stood up and turned to William and Emily. He announced that he had also prepared gifts for both of them. Duke William was delighted and told the man to bring the gifts and let him look at them. The man took a gift for the banquet hosts out of his sock. It was a single bill of ghostly coins, thinning the stench. When Hai handed Duke William the banknote with flies flying around it, the blonde man's face became sharply displeased. Duke William called Hai a bastard who was humiliating him and ordered one of the servants to throw him out of the house. The butler grabbed Hai by the collar and dragged him toward the exit, and the man shouted, asking the Duke if his ghost coins were really any more valuable than those ornaments. Duke William replied that the watch Chen Mu had given him was worth 1,000,000 ghost coins, while Hai's gift was just trash. Hai was perplexed because he didn't understand where this kid got so much money to buy a watch for 1,000,000 phantom coins. The guy with green hair realized that he could easily survive this apocalypse if he stole money from our hero. Duke William apologized to Chen Mu for witnessing the unpleasant scene, and our hero didn't see a problem with it. Madame Emily asked if the guy with green hair was Chen Mu's friend, but our hero replied that he didn't know him. Duke William smiled at his esteemed guest and replied that he understood everything, which meant that the guy did not need special protection. He looked sternly at the gentleman and ordered him to enjoy his dish and not to forget to eat absolutely everything. Zhao trembled with anger because Chen Mu could have helped him with just one word, but instead he chose to set him up. He stole a table knife from the table and thought that Chen Mu would not act so arrogantly for long, because when they left here, he would make him pay. The protagonist, meanwhile, was chatting pleasantly with Duke William and Madame Emily, not paying attention to Zhao. Zhao stuffed the stinking food into himself and looked at them with hatred, thinking that Chen Mu would soon no longer have the opportunity to laugh like that. Butler Ron thanked Chen Mu and Zhao for their participation in the mission and allowed them to leave the Shadow Museum, as they had successfully completed the task. Our hero rose from the table and thanked Duke William and Madame Emily for their hospitality, but Zhao began to feel a stomach ache. Zhao turned around and, clenching his teeth in anger, looked with hatred at Chen Mu, who didn't even have to eat rotten food. William asked Chen Mu if he should send someone to get rid of Zhao, who had previously behaved impolitely towards our hero. Chen Mu thanked the Duke and told him not to worry because his men were already waiting outside to deal with that guy. Duke William was amazed that our hero had subjects. He decided to strengthen his friendship with Chen Mu and show him the treasure. He told our hero that he had a treasure of the level of a ghost general, and he wanted to show it to him up there if he had time. The protagonist smiled and replied that it would be an honor for him to see a treasure of the level of a ghost general. Duke William was delighted and asked Chen Mu to follow him to his private quarters on the second floor. The following events took place outside the Shadow Museum, namely near its main gates. Zhao went outside, but he didn't understand why that idiot Chen Mu wasn't here yet, and the gate had already closed behind him. The green-haired boy clutched his stomach because it hurt a lot after the dish he had to eat at the banquet. He walked up to the tree and leaned against it, his whole body shaking from the pain. First, he decided to get some medicine. Zhao was delighted and thought that luck was on his side, because in a godforsaken place he came across a free taxi. The guy got into the car and demanded that the driver take him quickly to the nearest hospital. Clutching his stomach, he said that he would come back here and deal with that idiot as soon as he took his painkiller. The driver turned around and asked the passenger if by any chance the guy wanted to deal with Mr. Chen. Zhao turned pale with horror when he saw that the person sitting in front of him was not an ordinary person, but a ghost. Old man Wang Guishi demanded that the passenger answer his question immediately. His eyes began to emit pink flames. Trembling with fear, Zhao promised the driver that he would share with him after he robbed Mr. Chen, who owned millions of ghost coins. Wang Guishi, indignant, asked if the guy really thought he would let him go so easily if he wanted to attack his boss. Zhao was stunned. He didn't expect that Chen Mu was so rich that he could afford to hire a ghost as his personal driver. The guy with green hair started tugging at the door handle because he wanted to get out of this car immediately. The door wouldn't open, and Zhao panicked and started screaming, demanding that the driver let him out of the car immediately. Horror was frozen on the boy's face. His pupils narrowed and turned pink, just like Wang Guishi's eyes. Wang Guishi replied that Zhao had no chance, as he had provoked someone he shouldn't have, and wished him to be more careful in his next life. The next action took place again in the Foggy Museum, this time in Duke William's office furnished with expensive furniture. Duke William thoughtfully opened the door for our hero and asked him to enter the office first. The protagonist saw that Duke William's wine cabinet was completely empty, which meant that his earlier bet on it was not in vain. The boy turned around and said that it was a pity to see these cabinets empty because the Lord Duke must be very fond of wine. William, upset, admitted that he had been experiencing difficulties for a long time, even though he was titled Duke in the ghost world. Chen Mu made him happy by saying that he had prepared some red wine for the Duke in advance as a small gift because he respected his character. When he snapped his fingers, Duke William's empty wine cabinet instantly filled with dozens of bottles of expensive red wine. Duke William was taken aback because he knew a lot about wine and immediately realized that this was a very good drink. He was delighted because these bottles of wine worth millions of phantom coins were given to him as a sign of respect. William grabbed Chen Mu by the shoulders and burst into tears, saying that he had prepared a gift for the guy too, and that he should wait a little. The protagonist grinned. He was ready for the main event because he had already managed to become Duke William's favorite. Duke William presented the boy with the very golden armor that Chen Mu wanted to receive today. The blonde man said that this armor was a treasure that he had spent half his life collecting, and on the battlefield, it had saved his life many times. According to him, Chen Mu, wearing this armor, gains immunity from all monsters below the level of the Phantom King. Moreover, the main character will be able to change the rules of the Apocalypse game once a month, having this golden armor in his arsenal. The protagonist clarified whether he could really avoid punishment even if he broke the rules of the nightmare scenario. William confirmed his suspicions and asked Chen Mu to accept the armor as a small gift in return for the numerous gifts from the boy. Chen Mu felt awkward, waved his hands and told the Duke that he could not accept such a valuable gift. Duke William became angry and warned that he would perceive Chen Mu's behavior as arrogant if he refused to accept the gift. The protagonist reluctantly agreed to take this golden armor for himself as a sign of respect, since Duke William insisted so much. The boy was perplexed when the energy of the golden armor began to be absorbed into his body through his palm in streams of purple energy. The Duke reassured him, saying that the armor would be hidden within the youth's body and would be activated when Chen Mu was in danger. The protagonist felt a powerful ghostly aura begin to protect his body as he absorbed the golden armor. Chen Mu told the Duke that he appreciated his kindness, but this armor was truly too beautiful for him to take it easily. The boy snapped his fingers and declared that he wanted to purchase the armor from the Duke for 10 million ghost coins. Duke William's mouth dropped open in surprise, and he was taken aback when he saw a whole mountain of wads of ghostly bills in front of him. The blonde man's mouth began to water at the sight of the money, and he thought that Mr. Chen was truly a man of noble morals. William had one more gift for his friend, handing him a personal token as a sign of their new friendship. The Duke said that once Chen Mu was in an unsafe situation, he could summon William using this token. The protagonist's eyes lit up with delight. Today, he didn't expect to receive such a valuable gift. Now Chen Mu could call upon Duke William at any time to protect him if the ghost coins were not enough to solve the problem. On the sofa, Chen Mu asked the Duke if he had any brilliant ideas in his head about what other strange scenarios the boy could participate in. The Duke thought for a moment and replied to the boy that, in his opinion, the strange scenario at school was a good and relatively promising option. According to him, the needs of eccentrics are no different from the needs of ordinary people, and a good school is a source of high-level ghosts. Chen Mu was delighted to hear this idea and agreed that the children of high-ranking ghosts would try to get into a good school, so it was worth buying. The Duke replied that once our hero acquired a good school, high-ranking ghosts would bow before him so that their children could enter it. According to William, if Chen Mu needed any help from these ghosts, it would be easy to get. The protagonist thanked him very much for his instructions, and William replied that he was simply fulfilling his friend's duties. Chen Mu stood up to say goodbye to William and Madame Emily because he didn't want to disturb them anymore so late. William offered the guy to stay here for the night and leave the museum the following morning, but the guy refused because he still had urgent business. After the events unfolded again at the main gates of the foggy museum, it was already deep night outside. When Chen Mu left the museum accompanied by Madame Emily, a car and a personal driver were already waiting for the guy nearby. Madame Emily asked the boy to be careful on the way back, as the mountain was surrounded by thick fog, and Chen Mu thanked her for the reminder. He handed her a black card and said that if Madame or the Duke wanted to go shopping, they could use it. The girl was delighted because she saw in front of her a black gold card from the ghostly shopping center. The guy warned Madame Emily that the limit on the card was not that high, and the girl praised him for his politeness. When the main character left, Madame Emily looked at him with admiration and thought what a handsome and rich guy he was. Chen Mu walked to the car, and Wang Guishi reported to the boss that he had already solved the problem with that punk, according to his instructions. Our hero sat in the back seat of the ghost car and praised Wang Guishi for a job well done. Wang Guishi asked the boss where they would go next, and the boy told him to go to the midnight canteen. The happy ghost driver smiled and grabbed the steering wheel to take his boss to his destination. The purple taxi with Chen Mu and Wang Guishi inside took off, cutting through the foggy road. Soon Chen Mu arrived at his midnight canteen that he had recently bought, and the hall was full of employees. The midnight canteen employee bowed her head to the big man and informed the sir that they were not accepting his takeover request. The big man stamped his foot, shattering the stone floor, and expressed outrage that a pathetic eatery dared to compete with his five-star hotel. Chen Mu entered the dining room and asked what all the noise was about. The manager was glad to see him back and complained about the big guy who came here to cause trouble. The new boss of the midnight canteen turned to the angry, muscular man with scars on his face and asked what had happened. The big man crossed his arms and asked Chen Mu if he was the guy who bought the midnight canteen. The manager told the boss that they were facing the owner of a five-star hotel, who was trying to buy the establishment at a low price. The hotel owner told our hero that he was clearly asking for death because he was a weak person who dared to deal with anomalies. The protagonist smiled and replied that the big guy had too big a mouth for a ghost with such low abilities. The big guy said he would take the canteen for 30,000 ghost coins, and he shouldn't be blamed for being ruthless if he was refused. The canteen manager was outraged that the hotel owner was offering such a paltry sum for their establishment. The other employees also started yelling at the big guy, accusing him of coming here to create chaos and rob them. Releasing his sinister aura, the hotel owner declared that he was a chieftain-ranked ghost and that the lowly ghost citizens should not mess with him. Having prepared his fist, he admitted that he had not come to take this canteen away earlier because its previous owner was also of the rank of a leader. The big guy believed that now crushing the defenseless man who owned the cafeteria would be as easy as stepping on an ant. The main character showed 3 fingers and warned that he would count to 3, and during this time the man had to disappear from there. The man with the scar on his face laughed and asked what an ordinary person could do to him except jump up and hit him on the knee. The owner of a 5-star hotel attempted to hit our hero with a fist that emitted streams of ominous energy in all directions. The manager of the midnight canteen turned pale with fear when she saw that her boss was in danger. The golden armor given to our hero by Duke William worked in time, so the blow landed on the armor. The armor not only protected Chen Mu, but also counterattacked the big guy, causing him to fly back and scream. After this skirmish, the golden armor disappeared again. The protagonist smirked and asked the hotel owner if this was all he could do. Brushing the dust off his shoulder, Chen Mu called the man a mere trash, who had barely reached the rank of a chieftain and now dared to show off in front of him. The man was in shock. He didn't believe that this was possible and didn't understand how an ordinary person managed to block his blow. The hotel owner smirked and guessed that Chen Mu had some kind of defensive equipment that could withstand his attack. He stepped forward and suggested that our hero stop using the equipment and fight him fairly. Chen Mu asked if the man was ashamed to talk about honesty, since he was an anomaly who asked a normal person to fight him without a weapon. The hotel owner was seething with anger, and our completely calm hero declared that he was a man of his word, unlike the shameless man standing in front of him. The guy took out the personal token given to him by the Duke from the ring storage and hinted that this medallion could not be considered protective equipment. The large golden medallion that lay in the palm of our hero emitted streams of purple light in all directions. The big man was stunned when he saw Duke William's personal token. He froze, staring at the medallion, and began to sweat. The hotel owner jumped back, frightened by Chen Mu, because he did not understand how this man managed to get this token and what his background was. While showing the medallion to Boss 2, the boy admitted that he didn't know how to use it and asked the man to teach him how. Boss 2 immediately fell to his knees in front of our hero, afraid that he would now call Duke William, and promised to leave immediately. The staff at the Midnight Canteen were surprised that the man who had threatened them now submitted so easily to their boss. 2 began to roll on the floor, telling Chen Mu that the floor in the dining room was dirty and he wanted to clean it with his own body. The canteen cook was shocked that Boss Chen had withstood the blow of the Ghost Commander and also possessed Duke William's personal token. The second chef gave Chen Mu a thumbs up and praised him, saying that he was the most impressive person he had ever seen. The manager asked the boss if he was really going to let 2 go so easily, since he could secretly create problems for them later. The owner of the 5-star hotel was about to quietly leave the dining room, but Chen Mu noticed this and told him to stop. Trembling with fear, Boss 2 turned around and asked the boy if he had any further instructions. The protagonist approached the man and asked if he really was the manager of a 5-star hotel. Boss 2 was already willing to hand over all his hotels to the guy at a low price, if only he would spare him. Chen Mu replied that he would not take advantage of the situation and ordered the man to pay the market price. The man was delighted and began to endlessly thank Boss Chen for his generosity because he would sell his hotels to him for a pittance. Boss 2 handed our hero a piece of paper and asked him to sign it, and then the hotels would become his property. The protagonist signed a contract to become the new owner of a chain of 5-star hotels. Boss 2 scratched his head, smiled, and thanked Mr. Chen again, wanting to leave the Midnight Canteen. Chen Mu handed the manager a contract and told the girl to turn this 5-star hotel into a branch of their establishment. Sitting down on a chair, the guy asked the employees what the profit of their canteen was and whether they were suffering losses again. The girl happily informed her boss that not only had they not gone into the red, but they had managed to earn 200,000 phantom coins during this time. The main character was shocked and asked how they had gone from negative to positive so quickly, considering it had only been one day. The manager admitted that all this was thanks to their cook and the new dishes that this woman introduced into the menu. A woman wearing a chef's hat approached the boss and bowed her head to him, greeting him. The manager said that the cook had introduced an appetizer called lungs and ghost honey to the menu, which customers really loved. The protagonist thought that this particular dish was supposed to become the signature dish of the Midnight Hotel, and he knew this from his past life. Chen Mu wondered why this lung snack and ghost sauce appeared so early. Smiling kindly, our hero asked the cook if she had just come up with this recipe. The woman blushed with embarrassment and told her boss that, in fact, this recipe had been in her head for a very long time. The cook complained that the previous boss was a real exploiter who forced them to work for free, so she kept the recipe a secret. Unable to hold back her tears, the woman stated that the new boss was completely different. He did not exploit her, and even paid all her back wages. She admitted that this is why she decided to do everything possible to make the Midnight Cafe profitable again. Chen Mu scratched his head and replied that the employees might lose time to rest if the number of customers increased sharply. The cook and the manager looked at the boss in bewilderment, not understanding what kind of rest he was talking about, since the anomalies worked around the clock. The protagonist felt uncomfortable, covered his face with his hand, and told Manager Lee to gather all the employees here because he wanted to hold a meeting. After some time, all the staff of the Midnight Canteen gathered in the hall. Chen Mu asked if everyone was already there. The boss announced that, as a sign of gratitude for the work of his employees, he had decided to introduce a new system of benefits for everyone who worked there. The employees looked at each other, not understanding what benefits were and why they needed them, since the boss was already paying them a salary. One of them was unhappy because they would get all the benefits, but Boss Chen would get nothing. The protagonist realized that these ghosts had been exploited for so long that they began to convince themselves that this was the right thing to do. Manager Lee asked everyone to be quiet so Boss Chen could make his announcement about the new employee benefits. Chen Mu smiled and snapped his fingers to activate the storage of his spatial ring. At that moment, all the employees had a map of the fallen shopping center in their hands. This was the benefit package from Boss Chen. According to our hero, each card contains 5,000 ghost coins, and he will replenish it with another 1,000 every month. The waitress was shocked because she herself would never dare to go into the fallen shopping center because it was too steep. The red-haired boy started to cry. He wanted to urgently tell his mother that he was no longer a useless loser. Manager Lee danced around our hero with joy. She told the boss that he was too kind to them. Chunmu asked them not to rejoice prematurely because from tomorrow onwards, everyone's daily working hours would be reduced to 20 hours. The protagonist stated that the employees would be able to rest the remaining 4 hours of the day as they wished. Silence fell over the room. All the workers in the midnight canteen froze and stared at their boss with stunned eyes. Chunmu was puzzled by their reaction and guessed that 4 hours of rest was not enough. The employees were in shock. Some didn't even know what rest was, and the red-haired chef had been working without rest for 50 years. One of the cooks was outraged that they would have to rest for 4 hours every day because he didn't know what to do with so much free time. The cheerful red-haired chef declared to Boss Chen that from this day on he would become his most loyal employee. The waitress pushed the cook aside, jumped forward, and started shouting that she too would become the boss's most loyal employee. Our hero smiled, closed his eyes, and thought that once his business empire grew, employees would also get weekends, housing, insurance, and an 8-hour workday. A sinister smile appeared on Chunmu's face. He was glad that he would finally be able to build his own horror empire. He saw his employees as a harvest, and he already dreamed of turning them into the most valuable resource when his empire grew. One of the waiters jumped forward and began to flatter his boss, shouting that he was simply the king of hell in the flesh. The workers began to praise their boss, greeting the living king of hell, who would go straight there after death. Chunmu asked that they just continue calling him boss, because Hell King didn't sound like a compliment to him. The staff at the midnight canteen didn't argue and agreed to call Chunmu simply their boss, without making up titles. The protagonist waved his hand, ending the meeting, and ordered the waiters, cooks, and other cafe employees to return to work. The feeling of holding other people's lives in your hands really captivated the protagonist. He kept looking at his ring. He concluded that the reward system was indeed working when the waiters immediately began scrubbing the floor in the dining room until it sparkled. The guy asked Manager Lee if there was a free room in the staff dormitory because he wanted to spend the night there. Manager Lee blushed and dared to provide her boss with her personal dorm room. The main character was not averse to spending the night in the canteen manager's private room. He smiled amiably at the girl. Soon, Manager Lee led Chunmu to the door behind which her room was located. The girl could not stop blushing. Chunmu opened the door, walked into the room and told Manager Lee to get back to work, and the girl stuttered and agreed. The door slammed loudly, and the fair-haired girl remained standing outside, dumbfounded by surprise. Manager Lee ran away from there in tears because she hoped that she had just had a chance to get closer to Boss Chen. The protagonist plopped down on the bed and sighed heavily. He didn't want to let his employees slack off, since he had already given them time to rest. The next day, when the sun was shining brightly outside, Chunmu went to the school where he studied. He knew that horrors would invade it that night. The boy knew that Dark Knight Academy would grow at an incredible rate, and within 6 months, it would become the best school in the area. In the courtyard of the school, he firmly decided that he must take advantage of this opportunity to buy the school. The evil, chubby man, seeing our hero, shouted, asking what class the student was from. Pale with anger, the school employee asked the boy why he was hanging around the playground instead of being in class. The protagonist turned around and looked with a displeased face at the shouting man, who began to scold him. The man stared at the young man with wide eyes when he recognized the truant man as Chunmu. Chunmu approached the school principal and asked Mr. Zhang what he wanted from him, but the man just stood there with a look of shock on his face. Director Zhang hesitated in front of our hero, his face pale and sweating with fear. He regretted that he had run into Chunmu. The man decided that he was finished because he had mortally offended Chunmu, and he had hoped to use him to make friends with the horrors. Mr. Jiang understood that Chunmu could take his life at any moment, because the man had already made the boy's life miserable in every possible way. While groveling before Chunmu, the school principal smiled and began apologizing to the student endlessly. Smiling nervously, the man asked the respected student whether anything needed to be improved at their educational institution. The protagonist briefly and indifferently replied to Principal Zhang that he had no complaints about the school. Director Zhang looked at the boy with a startled expression when Chunmu apologized to him and asked if he was late. The man immediately began to convince the guy that he was not late and began to blame everything on the stupid schedule, which needed to be changed. The main character smiled and replied that there was no need to change the schedule and that he would just look around a bit and that the director should continue working. Smiling broadly, Zhang gave his student a thumbs up and asked him to come into his office if he needed anything. Chunmu was surprised at how quickly Director Jiang changed his tune and was sure that the man just wanted to use the boy to curry favor with the horrors. Soon the main character appeared in his office. He entered the classroom and proudly announced to everyone present that he had arrived. The teacher was delighted when she saw Chunmu, smiled at the boy, and asked him to quickly come into the office. Chunmu sat down at his desk, and his classmates immediately began gossiping behind his back because the teacher was so nice to him because he was rich and could even buy terrible scripts. The protagonist asked Miss Song to continue the lesson. The teacher asked the students to open their textbooks to the third page. The boy's classmate didn't understand why Chen Mu went to school if he was so cool, and his desk mate told him to just sit and study, because they didn't know how our hero might react to their conversations. A second later, the atmosphere in the school changed dramatically. It became dark outside, and an ominous energy filled the entire space. When the protagonist looked out the window, he became wary, but immediately realized that horrors had begun to invade the school. The classmates panicked, not understanding why it had suddenly gotten so dark and where this icy air came from. One of the girls jumped up from her seat and screamed loudly when a notification about a nightmarish mission appeared in front of her. The gist of the horror mission was that all students who received the paper would have to show up for the exam within 10 minutes. The protagonist's classmates began to run out of the classroom in panic, and the teacher also ran out and began to pray out of fear. Many of the students received an invitation to the horror mission. They were sad because they did not want to die, and one of the girls hoped for Chen Mu. One of the guys approached our hero and began calling him a god, in whom they should all believe because he could save their lives. The guy started begging Chen Mu to help him complete the mission, and the blonde also climbed onto his desk to beg for help. The protagonist smiled and remembered the proverb about relatives who will crawl out from under the ground if you get rich. An ominous voice announced that there was a stationary knife in each desk. The exam would last 2 hours, and during that time they had to kill the horror that lurked among the students. Chen Mu knew that if he stabbed the horror with this knife, black smoke would come out of the wounds, but this would anger the monster and it would attack everyone. The mission participants received a hint that the horrors usually do not move until they are detected, and that they also have 4 limbs. Chen Mu's classmates were at a loss as to how they could identify terror among their own. As if they made a mistake, they would be taking the life of an innocent person. For the protagonist, this mission was not new. He knew that there were only 2 ways to survive, and it was all about testing human nature. He knew he had to either test people at random or expose the hidden horror and take its life with one blow. The red-haired guy suggested that everyone should be wounded, because the wound would indicate whether they were human or not. The second student was against it because the horror would start attacking absolutely everyone if he was wounded, and one could not act so carelessly. The red-haired boy got angry and plunged a stationary knife straight into the table, asking his classmate what he was proposing in that case. One of the students began to accuse the girl of being the horror because she simply sat to the side, trembling with fear. Frowning, the angry boy swung a stationary knife, wanting to check whether his classmate was human or not. The protagonist stopped him and ordered everyone to take their seats. The guy was indignant because Chen Mu was pretending to be a hero, although he himself barely survived in the cafeteria. Chen Mu stated that they were all safe for now because the horror itself would not move unless they moved. Gritting his teeth in anger and pain, the dark-haired boy gave in and said that he understood everything because Chen Mu grabbed his arm tightly. The protagonist approached the board and remembered that in his past life this mission had ended in a massacre, but horror was never found. The guy decided that this time he had to cope, so he began to carefully read the hint from the apocalyptic system. The students looking out the window noticed that chaos had already begun in the neighboring classroom, but they seemed not to notice the horror. The girls sat quietly at the table, stunned by fear. One of them was already saying goodbye to her life because after an hour the horror had still not been found. The dark-haired guy told the girl to cover her mouth because she started to cause panic among the others. Chen Mu noticed that now everyone in the class had stood up from their seats, although according to the clue, horror usually does not move. The protagonist found it hard to believe the idea that popped into his head when he looked at the girl sitting alone. The young man's eyes widened as he finally realized where the horror was hiding. An ominous voice announced over the loudspeaker that the third class had failed the mission and half of the survivors had been eliminated. Our hero's classmates began to panic, exclaiming that everything was lost and that now they would all die here. The dark-haired guy turned to our hero and asked Chen Mu what he would say now, since things were going badly. The protagonist approached the desk where the frightened girl was sitting and told his classmates not to panic because he had already found horror. The girl looked at Chen Mu with frightened, wide eyes and was speechless, realizing that he was hinting at her. One of the boys found it hard to believe that his classmate Wang Fang was a horror and reminded Chen Mu how he himself saved her. The dark-haired man laughed because he himself had previously accused Wang Fan and ordered Chen Mu to take the girl's life. Wang Fang burst into tears and began to try to convince Chen Mu that she was not a horror. She asked the guy to believe her. The main character didn't react to the girl's tears in any way. He swung a stationary knife right in front of her desk. The stunned classmates froze, their mouths open. They didn't understand what was happening, but they didn't intervene. Fortunately, Chen Mu swung his sharp stationary knife and stabbed it not into Wang Fang, but into the desk where the girl was sitting. A frightened Wang Fang covered her face with her hands as Chen Mu stabbed the desk with all his might. The girl was confused because she thought Chen Mu was going to attack her with a knife, but he hit the desk. The dark-haired boy began to get indignant at our hero, not understanding why he was smashing the desk if he was ordered to hit Wang Fan. The main character asked the guy to calm down and just watch. He removed his hand from the knife, which began to tremble. Thick streams of ominous black smoke began to pour out from the place where Chen Mu had stabbed. The black smoke became thicker and thicker, gradually filling the entire office. Wang Fang crawled back, frightened. The girl became even more frightened when she saw that the desk had turned into a horror. Instead of legs, it had paws with claws. The dark-haired boy was unhappy that the horror was actually the desk, and not his classmate Wang Fan. An ominous voice announced that Chen Mu from the first class had found the target and the exam had been passed successfully. The mission was completed successfully. All the students who were in the same class with our hero survived and were not harmed. Chen Mu's classmates began to rejoice. The joyful girls hugged each other. The boys were happy that they got out alive. The students surrounded the protagonist, asking how he knew the horror was a desk, since they all thought it was a person. Chen Mu explained that it was simple because the exam rules had a tricky wording, and the boy asked him to explain in more detail. Our hero explained that the clue spoke of 4 limbs of horror, but it didn't necessarily have to be a person. According to him, they all immediately decided that the horror had taken on a human form, and this led them to a dead end and caused them to quarrel. The guy said that, according to the hint, the horror itself does not move, but he watched the whole class and all the kids move. Chen Mu stated that only one desk remained motionless the entire time, and it didn't move even when Wang Fang sat down next to it. The dark-haired guy gave our hero a thumbs up and praised him for staying calm in such a situation. The protagonist turned around and told his classmates to go home because the school was teeming with horrors, so there was no need to come back here anymore. The boy went out into the corridor. He felt sorry that the other classes were so unlucky, because in this apocalypse of horrors there is no justice. The entire corridor of his school was covered in blood, and while walking along it, Chen Mu got his sneaker dirty when he stepped in a red puddle. The protagonist knew perfectly well that even the survivors of this apocalypse would never be the same again, and this was proven by the insane laughter of a surviving girl nearby. Chen Mu went straight to the principal's office, opened the bloody door and apologized for the intrusion. The man with a mustache who was emitting dark smoke immediately recognized Chen Mu as the only student who had passed the exam. The new director of the ghost school asked the protagonist if he really had the nerve to walk around here like he was at home. Chen Mu smiled cheekily and asked the man why he couldn't just walk around here, since he had come to the director's office on business. The stern director stood up and declared that people like Chen Mu had no right to show off in front of him because people were their food. The protagonist asked the director not to rush to refuse, and presented him with a small welcome gift in the form of a wad of phantom bills. The man with the mustache was stunned because there were tens of thousands of ghost coins lying in front of him, which was a colossal amount. The school principal cleared his throat and immediately changed his tone, assuming that the person standing in front of him was Chen Mu's student. After taking the gift, the man introduced himself as Principal Qian from Dark Knight School, and he had already heard about Chen Mu after dinner in the cafeteria. The protagonist smiled and proudly confirmed that he was Chen Mu, who owned the Midnight Cafeteria. Director Qian sat the guy down in a chair and admitted that he didn't expect that Chen Mu was not only smart, but also rich. The man asked the boy to try the tea and said that he had been saving it for decades. It was a crystal-clear liquid in a glass. Chen Mu smiled and replied that he should also show a little courtesy since Director Qian was so sincere. The guy got up from the couch, waved his hand and activated his storage to dump several bottles of expensive wine onto the table. Director Qian's eyes lit up as he immediately recognized the bottles as aged red wine from the Fallen Wall collection. He was even more stunned when he saw the Ghost General's token on the table. He found it hard to believe that this boy had such a treasure. The protagonist immediately took Duke William's token and apologized to the director for accidentally dropping the treasure. Director Qian was now no longer surprised that Chen Mu was acting so brazenly, because there was clearly someone influential behind him. The man, tensing up, nervously clutched the glass of tea in his hand and cautiously asked the student what matter he wanted to discuss with him. The protagonist decided to get straight to the point and declared that he would like to purchase the Dark Knight School for 100 million ghost coins. When Director Qian heard this, he choked and spat out all the tea he had just wanted to drink from his mouth. Chen Mu grimaced as the tea spray from the stunned director's mouth hit him directly in the face. The man with the mustache stood up, wiped his mouth from the tea, and assumed that Disciple Chen must be just joking. The protagonist replied to Director Qian that he was not joking at all and that he was completely serious about acquiring Dark Knight School. Director Qian admitted that this school was worth at most 50 million ghost coins, so he found it hard to believe this proposal. Chen Mu leaned slightly over the table and told the man that then he had even less reason to refuse the guy's purchase. The man began to pace around the office, and Chen Mu knew that soon the noble horrors would be tearing each other apart to get places for their children in this school. The boy understood that if he bought the school now for just 100 million phantom coins, he would then be able to do whatever he wanted with it. Director Qian decided to believe Chen Mu, but 100 million was a lot of money, so he asked if the guy could afford it. Chen Mu snapped his fingers and asked the man not to worry, as he had many shortcomings, but he always had enough money. The man's eyes lit up with delight as he was surrounded by piles of stacks of money and phantom bills that Chen Mu had taken out of the vault. Director Qian found it hard to believe what he was seeing because in front of him were genuine ghost bills in gigantic quantities. The main character, grinning smugly, asked the school principal if this money was enough to buy the school. The man admitted that Chen Mu was rich enough to buy the school, but he still could not transfer ownership of it to him. Chen Mu looked at the ghost working as the director here with a bit of disgust and asked why he couldn't do it. Kian explained that he was only the acting principal and that Dark Knight High School actually belonged to the school council. According to him, this school ghost council can't stand humans, so they added 2 special rules. The frustrated protagonist asked the acting director to explain what special rules were being discussed. Kian stated that according to the first rule, if a person buys the Dark Knight School, he only pays 1/10 of the market price. Chen Mu replied that there is no such thing as a free lunch and asked to tell him about the second special rule. The man sighed heavily and decided to warn Chen Mu about the second rule, since they were friends, although he was forbidden to talk about it. Tian secretly told the boy that the person who signed the contract to purchase the school would be immediately destroyed. The protagonist realized that the school board was simply luring rich people with the first rule, and with the second, they were brutally eliminated and their money was taken away. Director Qian told the boy that he didn't mind selling him the school, but that purchase could take Chen Mu's life. Chen Mu smiled and told the school principal that it didn't matter because he had already made his decision. The man tried to dissuade Chen Mu and warned him again that he would be finished as soon as the boy signed the contract. The main character was not at all frightened by this. He replied that everything was fine and asked the man to bring him the contract. The frowning director still brought the contract to the guy. Now he considered Chen Mu not smart, but a stupid rich man without brains. Without fear of dying at the hands of the ghostly school council, the protagonist signed the contract. As soon as Chen Mu did this, streams of dark smoke poured out from the sheet of paper, rapidly filling the entire space. Director Qian sighed heavily because our hero didn't even feel sorry for his brilliant future. As the dark energy concentrated in the office, it turned into a sharp scythe, sparkling with purple lightning. This scythe was purposefully approaching our hero, who was sitting calmly on the sofa and told the director not to rush to conclusions. As soon as the blade approached Chen Mu at a dangerous distance, his golden armor activated and protected him from death. The scythe shattered into tiny pieces, the golden armor disappeared, leaving behind a bright yellow light, and our hero was saved. Principal Qian was shocked because he saw that the protagonist was actually able to resist the power of the school council's rules. Chen Mu smiled, brushed the dust off his shoulder, and replied that he had just the item that could withstand such attacks. The man knew that in the entire world of horrors, only Duke William possessed protective magic capable of resisting the power of the rules. Director Qian guessed that the Ghost General's token that Chen Mu possessed actually belonged to Duke William. Holding the contract, the protagonist asked the principal if he was now the new head of the Dark Knight School Council. The man with the mustache smiled and invited the newly appointed headmaster of Dark Knight School to take his place of honor. The main character refused to sit in the director's chair because he was not strong in management. He allowed Chen to continue to run the school. Director Qian was delighted. He thanked our hero for his trust and promised that he would not let him down. Finally, Chen Mu ordered the principal to notify all the teachers and staff of the school that a general assembly would be held in the schoolyard in 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, events were already unfolding in the courtyard of Dark Knight School. The sky was painted red. The school staff were stunned when they heard the news from Principal Qian that the school had been sold and that someone else was now in charge of the school board. Principal Qian ordered everyone to be quiet and give their new student council president a proper round of applause. The man with the mustache, speaking into the microphone, asked the main character to come on stage, introducing the guy to the entire audience. The teachers were shocked because they knew Chen Mu as the student who had passed the nightmare exam today, and now he had bought this school. One of the employees already thought that they were finished because they created a terrifying mission to kill people, and Chen Mu would now definitely take revenge on them. She burst into tears and hugged her colleague because she believed that Chen Mu would make them pay 100-fold for everything, and it was too late to quit. The protagonist picked up the microphone and announced to the teachers that, from now on, Dark Knight School was part of his empire. The boy told the school staff that he had gathered them all there for 3 reasons, and he was ready to voice them. Smiling, Chen Mu admitted that all 3 reasons were related to salary increases for school staff. The new school principal happily announced that, as of today, the salaries of all teachers and staff will double. The teachers were delighted because Chen Mu not only had no intention of taking revenge on them, but also gave them all sorts of concessions, which meant that he was not the head of the council, but the king of hell in the flesh. In addition, the protagonist allowed the school staff to rest for 4 hours every day, as well as the workers in his cafeteria. The next bonus for teachers and staff was that they could now eat at the midnight cafeteria for free. The teachers' eyes lit up with joy. They smiled and clapped their hands with happiness, listening to the speech of the new boss. They began to praise the new director. The women even shouted at Chen Mu that they wanted to give birth to little terrors from him. In return, Chen Mu had one demand. Within a month, the teachers had to transform this school into the most elite institution in the industry. The teacher asked the boss not to doubt and guaranteed that within a month the average score for the entire school in foreign languages would rise to 140. The protagonist finished his speech and handed the microphone to Director Qian, leaving the rest to him. He left the stage, and Director Qian asked the boy to take care of himself and call him if he needed anything. The teachers also said goodbye to him. Principal Qian gave the teachers another piece of good news and asked them all to go to the midnight cafeteria for a free dinner from the new boss. One of the school staff members said that everyone was celebrating too early and that they would most likely be fed bloody scraps rather than delicacies. The other teachers also began to doubt because their mother always told them that there is no such thing as a free lunch. One of the teachers was happy even with the leftovers because they had already received a lot of bonuses and she would tolerate it if the food was so-so. Some school staff were not happy about the new boss because they did not believe that a person could be so generous. The following events took place in the midnight cafeteria, where a free dinner was provided for the Dark Knight school staff. The teachers were shocked when they saw the dishes and asked the manager if they had accidentally served this food to them in order to rip them off. The table was filled with dishes that were appetizing to ghosts and gave off foul aromas, such as fish, noodle soup, and more. Manager Lee reassured the teachers, saying it was a standard lunch their boss had prepared for the staff. One of the teachers called her colleague a country bumpkin who knows nothing about food and still doubts Principal Chen's generosity. The woman working at the school was delighted with the lungs and ghost honey, sweet and sour ghost fish, soul-invoking pork, and other dishes. The teacher took out her phone because she felt she had to brag about today's dinner from the generous principal. She posted a photo of herself smiling happily on a ghost social network and boasted about eating lungs and ghost honey. This post was seen by 3 bodybuilder ghosts sitting on the street, and they found it hard to believe that all these dishes could be eaten alone. They saw a live broadcast of a happy teacher showing off a table laden with gourmet food. The jock was envious when he saw such a variety of dishes. He wouldn't mind getting a job there himself to receive such dinners for the staff. The gang leader hit him on the head and shouted that he could only dream because they hadn't even finished elementary school. The man told his subordinate to stop daydreaming and just do his job, since they barely had enough money to eat. One of the bandits reported to the boss that there was a man ahead who, it seemed to him, would be easy to swindle out of money. The red-haired guy told the others to quickly approach the man to sell him their new credit offer. The main character was walking near school, having finished all his work there, and now he just wanted to buy a luxurious house to enjoy life. Suddenly, several big guys stopped him and asked, showing him a piece of paper, whether Sir was interested in a small loan. Chen Mu walked past, roughly pushing the red-haired guy with his shoulder, and briefly replied that he was not interested in this proposal. The red-haired giant continued to smile and once again suggested that Chen Mu think about it, since their offer was very generous, only 5% per month. Our hero assumed that he would simply be executed on the spot if he could not pay the interest in phantom coins, even though he would receive the loan in human currency. The muscular bandits flinched and stared at the guy in shock because this brat had actually figured out their trick. The gang leader suggested to his subordinates to get out of here because Chen Mu's aura made him feel uncomfortable. The guys decided to leave and not bother Chen Mu anymore. One of them turned around one last time, smiled and said goodbye to our hero. The main character didn't want to let them go so easily. The guy ordered the muscular bandits to stop immediately. The bandits turned around and looked at Chen Mu with fear. One of them, the bravest, asked our hero what he wanted from them. Chen Mu saw that these guys were all at the level of a ghost commander, and they would be perfect for the role of school security and maintaining order in the midnight cafeteria. The leader of the extortion gang, clearly fearing our hero, nevertheless warned the guy that they were not easy prey for him because they were ghosts, and he was a human. The protagonist replied that they had all misunderstood and asked if they would like to work for him, since they looked like tough guys. The dumbfounded bandit asked his leader, Brother G, if they were really so good that they would be hired. The most vicious of the extortionists looked fiercely at our hero and told him not to try to pull the wool over their eyes. The big man with the mohawk, waving his fist, shouted that they would rather go to the next world than work for a man. The remaining bandits supported their partner, One of them shouted that horrors would never be slaves of man. The protagonist threw up his hands and replied that he was sorry, because he had already prepared a salary of 10,000 a month for them, as well as housing and food as a bonus. Chen-mu turned around and decided to leave, saying that he was not going to insist if the guys were not interested in this proposal. The big guy shouted, asking our hero to stop, and asked if he was talking about salary and human currency. The protagonist turned around and told the extortionist that he would never stoop to such cheap tricks as theirs. All three muscular guys bowed their heads to Chen-mu and shouted that they were at Boss Chen's complete disposal and let him exploit them as he pleased. Chen-mu handed the boys Dark Night School employee cards and said that with them they could eat in the cafeteria for free until they were full. The big guys, still bowing their heads to Boss Chen, simultaneously thanked him for the cards. The cheerful, muscular guys, waving their arms with happiness, ran away, and our hero felt awkward about their behavior. Now that they were around, at least the ordinary horrors wouldn't dare to come into the school or cafeteria, and Chen-mu was glad about that. The protagonist called his personal driver, Wang Guishi, and told him to pick him up at the gates of Dark Night School. 10 minutes later, a blinding green light of headlights appeared on the horizon, meaning that Wang Guishi's taxi was already approaching its destination. The purple car pulled up right next to our hero, who was still standing on the street waiting for a taxi. Chen-mu got into the car, Wang Guishi immediately asked where they were going, and our hero ordered to take him to the mountain yard by the water. Soon, Wang Guishi brought his boss to the mountain yard by the water, a complex of cottages for ghosts surrounded by a purple transparent dome. The purple taxi entered the territory of an elite residential complex and stopped near the barrier that protected the ghost houses. Wang Guishi reported to his boss that the road was blocked by a powerful barrier, and his car would not be able to travel further into the territory. Chen-mu was only pleased by this because this area could be called truly safe, since no one could enter it, regardless of their level of strength. The protagonist got out of the car and closed the door behind him to walk to the residential complex, allowing Wang Guishi to leave. The guy approached the protective barrier that kept strangers and ghosts out of the elite cottage complex. The protagonist touched the purple barrier and wondered how he could trigger a new horror scene here. Seeing the man near the barrier, the employee of the housing complex immediately ran up to him and asked if he had come to view the house. The friendly blonde smiled at our hero, and Chen-mu was surprised because he saw a person in front of him, not a ghost. The girl asked Chen-mu again if he wanted to buy real estate here, and our hero confirmed her suspicions. Through the barrier, the blonde handed over a business card for their estate and offered our hero to take it to enter the grounds. The protagonist grinned mysteriously when he saw that this blue card passed right through the barrier of rules. The guy chuckled as the barrier in front of him dissolved, allowing him to enter the complex. Now Chen-mu realized that only those who had received a special business card from the estate could enter the territory. The protagonist was surprised when he noticed out of the corner of his eye that the blonde girl had gone to the other side of the barrier. Chen-mu turned around and asked the employee of the apartment complex if she wasn't going to come with him to look around. The girl replied that she was trapped here, and if it weren't for Chen-mu, she would never have gotten out. So the guy can only pray that someone will come and replace him. The protagonist froze, his mouth open. Only now did it dawn on the guy that he was not a respected client to her, but simply a tool for escape. He clicked his tongue in irritation because he had fallen for the illusion created by the barrier of rules, and now he saw the true picture of this place. The territory of the residential complex looked unkempt and abandoned. He couldn't even tell where the sales department was. The protagonist, looking around, stopped when he heard someone's voice calling him a stupid person. It turned out that it was a local ghost with a monocle who told Chen-mu to sit there and not move because he would not find a way out. Chen-mu replied that he was mistaken because he was just estimating how long it would take him to renovate this block once he acquired it. The man with the mustache decided that the guy was making fun of him because he was thinking about buying villas instead of panicking after being caught in a horror scene. A local resident asked the protagonist if he had any idea how much the entire estate was worth. The man said that the estate would cost him 50 million ghost coins, so Chen-mu should stop dreaming. The protagonist smiled and asked if all this really cost only 50 million, because the amount seemed paltry to him. The local ghost's mouth dropped open in surprise and he started sweating when Chen-mu announced that he was buying all of these villas. Our hero snapped his fingers to activate the spatial epic ring and retrieve the required amount from the vault. A whole mountain of wads of ghostly bills appeared in front of the local ghost, causing the man with the mustache to step back in surprise. The man was shocked because in front of him stood an ordinary person who had so easily pulled out so many ghost coins. He thought that since Chen-mu was so rich, he should squeeze every drop out of him, because lost profits were the same as a loss. The protagonist smiled and offered the local ghost to sign a contract since there were no more problems. The man admitted that he had just made up a figure to check the boy's solvency. In fact, the actual price had not yet been revealed. Chenmu looked at the local ghost with a challenging look and asked how much the complex actually cost. The ghost stated that in order to buy the entire Mountain Yard estate by the water, 1 billion ghost coins would actually be needed. Our hero realized that the ghost was treating him like an idiot who could be robbed, and he decided to also act against the rules. The boy told the ghost that money was no problem and asked if he could invite a couple of friends to his new home. The ghost from the sales department easily agreed to let Chenmu's friends come here, just to sell the estate to the client. He handed Chenmu an invitation in the form of a black card. As soon as our hero uttered the necessary phrase, it would fly to his friend on its own. The protagonist, holding a black card in his hands, said the necessary phrase and invited the people he had thought of to see his new house. The two cards activated and flew into the sky, leaving behind bright streaks of purple light. The man looked at the boy in confusion when he told the card that the owner of the estate was going to give it to Chenmu. The protagonist warned the ghost from the sales department that his friends would soon be there. The ghost declared that he would consider these 50 million ghost coins as a deposit, and Chenmu only had to pay a little less than 1 billion. Chenmu asked not to rush the procedure and took the money back to the vault, because the ghost still had to show him the estate. While walking around the area, the ghost asked what kind of friends Chenmu had invited and whether they were also rich. The protagonist replied that he had invited a bunch of rich slackers, and the man would see everything with his own eyes when they arrived. The man with the monocle smiled slyly, hoping that he would be able to squeeze money out of Chenmu's rich friends as well. The ghost showed Mr. Chen a house called White Jade Mountain Courtyard and allowed him to move in as long as he paid the deposit. Chenmu asked him not to rush because he would only pay when his friends arrived, and promised to give him 1 billion if the ghost did not change his mind. The man from the sales department smiled in anticipation of receiving such money, so he agreed to wait a little longer. The ghost became quiet and visibly tense when he sensed that someone had arrived on the estate grounds. He informed Mr. Chen that his friends had already arrived, so he should go to the gate to meet them. Afterwards, the action took place in a small house that served as the sales department of a complex of ghost villas. Bosni was surprised when he saw Manager Song, a girl who works in the Fallen shopping mall, standing in front of him. The man didn't understand what she was doing there because this shopping center is one of the main forces of horror in this city. Manager Song came to Mr. Chen with a housewarming gift, as he is a special customer of their shopping center. Boss Ni was stunned because he himself couldn't even claim a regular card in this shopping mall, but this kid owned a black gold one. The man got scared. He realized that he was in trouble, and this time he ran into a steel plate, so it was better to retreat. The ghost immediately offered our hero a 50% discount on the original price, since he was friends with Manager Sun. The protagonist taunted the man for rushing again, as his second friend had not yet arrived. Boss Ni was dumbfounded when he saw a bright purple aura in front of the sales department entrance, indicating the appearance of a ghostly general. Duke William, a phantom general, entered the room. The blonde man, seeing our hero, asked if he was late. Duke William spread his arms wide and joyfully greeted Chen Mu and congratulated him on his housewarming. Boss Ni's mouth dropped open in shock as it turned out that Duke William himself was also friends with this brat. The protagonist hugged Duke William, who said that he rushed here as soon as he received his invitation. Chen Mu reassured the Duke, saying that he had arrived just in time because he had caught the most interesting part. Our hero introduced his ghostly friend to Boss Ni, who owns the mountain estate on the water complex. The man with the monocle immediately extended his hand to the Duke and said how pleased he was to meet William, about whom he had long heard. Duke William shook his hand and praised Bosni for his generosity, as he had received a message from Chen Mu that he was going to give him an entire estate. Bosni told the Duke that Mr. Chen had misunderstood because he had no intention of giving him the estate for free. The protagonist asked the ghost why he had not objected when he sent out invitations with this message, and Duke William also asked for an explanation. Sweating with embarrassment, Ni wriggled out and replied that he was going to give Chen Mu not only the estate, but also all the parking spaces for free. Chen Mu replied that something didn't add up, because Ni had just asked for a whole billion ghost coins for the mountain estate by the water. Trembling with fear, Boss Ni replied that he found Mr. Chen so charming and witty that he was just making a joke. He knelt down, and with trembling hands, handed over the contract to our hero, and also stated that he was deeply impressed by Chen Mu's character. The man grabbed his head and began to cry. He understood that he could not allow himself to anger Duke William, otherwise he would not leave here alive. The protagonist took the contract and thanked Boss Ni for his generosity. He happily accepted all 47 villas as a gift. Chen Mu signed the contract so that all 47 villas and parking spaces officially became his property. The boy's body began to absorb the power of the contract. Now that he owns a hotel, a villa complex, a canteen, and a school, his strength has reached the intermediate level of a ghost commander. Boss Ni announced that the mountain water estate now belongs to our hero, so he will not interfere with his meeting with his friends. The protagonist allowed the ghost with a monocle on his face to leave and advised him to be careful on his way out. Duke William asked Chen Mu if he wanted him to deal with Ni, as the man had suffered serious losses and was unlikely to let it go. Chen Mu refused to help, saying that he had already arranged everything, so Boss Ni would not cause them any problems. Boss Ni was already racing through the residential complex to get to a safe place as quickly as possible. The man cursed Chen Mu and this Duke William who was protecting our hero, and was sure that the guy would not always be under the protection of the Ghost General. The Ghost clenched his fist tightly and firmly decided that he would take revenge on the main character, since he had suffered great losses today because of him. Boss Ni continued to run and didn't notice how a white van with blinding blue headlights approached him. The man was forced to stop abruptly when the white van blocked his path and pulled up right in front of him. The ghost collapsed onto the asphalt in surprise, and the van driver became angry and asked the man if he was blind. Boss Ni also became angry and demanded that the driver pay him at least 10,000 ghost coins for almost hitting him. The tough guys our hero had recently hired emerged from the van, intending to deal with Boss Ni. The man with the monocle was scared when he saw these big guys. He asked who they were and who sent them. The gang leader introduced himself to him as Brother Jai and said that their car was spacious, so why shouldn't the man join them? Brother Jai grabbed the ghost by his skinny, pale arm and pulled him into the car while he screamed and demanded that the big man let him go. The bandit didn't let the man go. He practically dragged Boss Ni into the car and he still tried to resist, but to no avail. Ji explained that Boss Ni had tried to trick their boss, so they intended to check if the ghost was still in his right mind. The gang leader began to deal with Boss Ni right in the car, and the screams of the ghost could be heard from the van, begging him to stop. After the events unfolded in the western part of the Gornaya Voda estate, this street seemed less neglected. The protagonist, the shopping mall manager, and William were walking outside when Chen Mu suddenly received a message on his phone. Chen Mu took out his phone and saw a message from Brother Jai, who reported to the boss that everything was done. Our hero was delighted because he didn't even expect that these three would be able to deal with Boss Ni so quickly. He calculated that there were 47 villas in total, and he would only leave 10 for sale, while the rest would be used as gifts to powerful monsters to secure their support. The boy approached His Grace Duke William and stated that he would like to give him one of the villas as a gift in return for his visit. Duke William felt awkward accepting such a valuable gift from our hero, so he admitted that he did not consider it appropriate. The protagonist asked William not to act so politely because they were friends and there was no need for it. William smiled broadly and asked our hero to simply let him know if he ever needed his help again. Chen Mu was pleased because now that the estate was under William's protection, any horror would think twice before coming here. The protagonist approached Manager Sun and thanked the girl for coming to his housewarming party. Manager Song replied that Chen Mu was their most valuable customer, so showing respect was the least they could do. Chen Mu shared his plans and said that he plans to renovate all the villas, since most of them are just bare walls. The guy said that he planned to buy all the building materials from the collapsed shopping center, so Manager Song should prepare a preliminary design. The girl beamed with joy and thought that she would earn a lot of money on this project because the repairs would cost hundreds of millions of phantom coins. She praised Chen Mu for his generosity and assured him that she would prepare the perfect renovation project with the best quality at the best price. The protagonist replied that money was not a problem, but he wanted to get the best and most expensive repairs. Manager Sun smiled and said that she would immediately begin creating a renovation project. Duke William asked Chen Mu if he was going to sell the rest of the houses, as the renovation would cost hundreds of millions of ghost coins. Chen Mu replied that he had no intention of selling the villas because he couldn't make much money by simply selling houses. He spread his arms wide and announced that he was going to create an exclusive club for the horror world's elite on the premises of these villas. A stunned Duke William suggested that relying solely on villas to create such a club would be difficult. Chen Mu replied that he also planned to develop the accompanying infrastructure and asked the Duke to help him move forward. Our hero expressed confidence that the newly minted aristocratic ghosts would not miss such a wonderful opportunity to make friends with high society. Duke William was glad to help his friend. He smiled and asked the protagonist to rely on him. After talking with his friends, the main character went to his office, where he sat at his desk and studied documents. Manager Lee entered his office and reported that Manager Song had arrived from the fallen shopping center. The protagonist, looking up from his papers, looked at the canteen manager and gave permission for Ms. Song to enter. Ms. Song handed over the renovation project she had prepared for Boss Chen and asked him to take a look at it. Chen Mu smiled after he glanced at the project and declared that he was completely satisfied with it, thanking the girl for her work. Manager Sun replied that she was happy to try, but she still had a couple of questions she would like to discuss with the guy. The protagonist looked at her with fear and suggested that he first needed to make a deposit before the renovation work could begin. Sun replied that it wasn't that, they just hadn't found a suitable construction crew yet, as they couldn't just hire anyone for such an important project. Chen-mu scratched his chin and suggested postponing the project's deadline for a few days if they couldn't find a team that quickly. Manager Lee suggested to boss Chen that they simply enlist the help of their cafeteria workers, as it would be more peaceful if their own people were involved. The protagonist didn't like this idea because work in the midnight cafeteria would stop if all the employees were busy with repairs. The blonde suggested that the cafeteria staff help the guy with the repairs during their 4 free hours. Manager Sun was shocked when she heard that the cafeteria staff were taking 4 hours off every day, even though they worked around the clock at the mall. The main character didn't like this idea either, because it would mean he would take back his words and deprive the employees of the promised rest. Lee didn't see anything wrong with this because, in the ghost world, there wasn't even such a thing as overtime pay. Boss Chen still agreed to let his employees work during their legal rest hours since they didn't mind. The guy said that these 4 hours should be considered overtime and they would be paid triple. Manager Lee refused because they would be ashamed to take the money, since in the ghost world there is no overtime pay. Chen-mu stood up and slammed the table, declaring that his words were law, so overtime pay was no longer negotiable. The canteen manager bowed her head obediently before him and asked him not to be angry, promising to arrange everything immediately. The girl, nervous after her conversation with her boss, quickly left the office, wiping her sweaty forehead with her sleeve. Manager Song blushed after seeing our hero's domineering nature, and she really liked this behavior. The protagonist handed the documents to Manager Sun and asked her to purchase all the materials according to the project. The girl smiled and assured Boss Chen that all the building materials for the villa renovations would be of the highest quality. Chen-mu looked at her with a friendly smile and thanked the shopping mall manager for her efforts. The manager of the midnight cafeteria returned to the common room, where the staff of the establishment and the school were sitting at the table, in a bad mood. The girl was forced to interrupt the staff dinner. She said that their boss had new orders. The red-haired chef was already happy because Boss Chen's orders were always good and asked her not to keep her waiting. Manager Lee said that the Shanshui yard, which the boss recently bought, was short of workers for repairs, so they would help with it during their free time. The cook stood up and declared that this was wonderful because now they could finally thank the boss for his kindness. The other workers were also happy that they would finally be able to work overtime for their beloved boss. Manager Lee asked them not to rejoice prematurely because this work would be paid triple as overtime. The red-haired chef stared at the manager with dumbfounded eyes when he heard this. Now he was not so happy. The waiter grabbed his head in horror because he considered overtime pay not a blessing, but a real punishment. The other employees were also unhappy. They were already living off the boss, and now the boss was at risk of going broke because of them. The chef turned to his friends and suggested that they honestly ask themselves how Boss Chen felt about them. One of the kitchen staff gave a thumbs up and said they couldn't have asked for better treatment. The waiter agreed with him and added that Boss Chen was ready to increase their benefits during the most difficult initial period for him. One of the employees even burst into tears because he wouldn't be able to look all the ghostly people in the eyes if he agreed to take this extra payment. The red-haired chef spread his arms out to the sides and asked all his colleagues what they should do in this difficult situation. They started shouting in unison that they were ready to work overtime completely free of charge to pay back their boss. The brunette suggested that his colleague agree on something before agreeing to work overtime. The waiter sitting at the table looked at the cook in bewilderment and asked what he wanted to agree on. The guy suggested that none of them should mark themselves on the overtime sheet when they came to do repairs on the estate. The waiter supported this brilliant idea because this way they wouldn't get that damn overtime pay. Manager Lee burst into tears because she didn't expect her subordinates to show such high conscientiousness today. The girl belligerently declared that they should now go to the Shanshui courtyard to share the burden of their boss Chen. The midnight cafeteria staff ran out into the street in joy, each of them happy to work an extra 4 hours for free. Soon Chen-mu found himself at the threshold of one of the villas. He saw that the guys had done in a few hours the work that would have taken several days. The big guys he had recently hired, as well as other guys, worked hard on the renovation, and the villa was completely transformed. The protagonist smiled sweetly and thanked the employees for masterfully completing such a difficult job. The big guys told the boss not to worry because they guarantee high quality, even though they are working for free today. Brother Jai shut his subordinate up because they had agreed not to tell the boss that they had decided to work for free. The guy felt ashamed that he accidentally blurted this out to Boss Chen because he absolutely cannot keep his mouth shut. The protagonist smirked and demanded that they give their reasonable explanations. He was angry at the heroes who secretly violated his orders. The 3 muscular boys huddled together and trembled with fear. They admitted their guilt and began to beg for mercy. Chen-mu sighed heavily and said that he knew that they had voluntarily decided to work for free, but the rules had to be followed. The guy called Manager Lee and told the girl to strictly monitor the timesheet so that there were no absences or unregistered overtime. The protagonist told the boys that he would order the manager to pay them overtime and punish them if this happened again. Brother Jai asked Boss Chen to calm down and suggested that he take a look at his bedroom, which was already completely renovated. Our hero was glad that the renovation in his bedroom was ready, calmed down, and agreed to take a look at the new decor. When he entered the bedroom, everything was sparkling with cleanliness and newness of decoration. The guy declared that the renovation here was quite good. Brother Jai reported to our hero that, according to the schedule, the finishing work in this house would be completed within 2 days. The protagonist looked at him and praised his zeal for work, but reminded him that breaking his rules was strictly prohibited. The big guy asked his boss not to worry and promised that as long as he was there would be no more problems with time tracking. Smiling ingratiatingly at the boss, Brother G suggested that he go home and rest because it was already too late. The protagonist nodded his head and replied that he didn't expect Brother Jai to be such a smart guy. Brother Jai scratched his head, smiled stupidly, and declared that Boss Chen's health was more important to them than any salary. Soon, Chen Mu returned to the midnight canteen office. Manager Lee reported that she had already paid the overtime to the employees who had worked secretly yesterday. Boss Chen glanced at the overtime sheet, which listed how many hours each employee had worked. Some doubts crept into our hero's head, so he asked the girl if she was sure that there were no tricks in this report card. Manager Lee's face was frozen in horror, and she hesitated before making any excuses to Boss Chen. Chen Mu got angry and slammed the table, asking who in this cafeteria would even listen to him if even the manager dared to lie to him. Li Xiaoxiao bowed her head to her boss and apologized to him because she felt guilty. The tired protagonist rubbed his eyebrows and told the girl that he didn't expect an apology from her, and she understood that. The manager of the midnight cafeteria told the boss that in fact everyone did report in on time, as he had ordered. The girl explained that employees simply unknowingly arrive early and leave work much later. The protagonist became even more angry and declared that this was a real riot and that this terrible rat race had begun in his establishments. Chen Mu sighed heavily and asked, what if the employees started to collapse from such intense work, since they didn't even have health insurance yet? A puzzled Li Xiaoxiao asked her boss what health insurance was, as it was the first time she had heard of it. The protagonist sat back down at the table and remembered that hospitals for ghosts are now a rarity. Few of them can receive medical care. The guy decided that he would buy a hospital specifically for ghosts, so that the lives of all the ghosts in the city would be in his hands. Manager Lee looked at her boss with confusion when he asked where ghosts were treated if they were injured. The girl told the boss that they, the ghosts, buy medicine for minor ailments, and for serious ones, they simply wait for death. Chen Mu had heard that the chances of recovery in ghost hospitals were slim, but he couldn't refuse treatment completely. Li Xiaoxiao sighed heavily and replied that there was no hospital for ghosts in Wangjiang City at the moment. According to her, for this reason, ghosts have to travel to a neighboring city. But the prices there are exorbitant, and there is a high risk of losing both money and one's life. The protagonist shuddered after hearing her story and decided that he urgently needed to buy a hospital because only he could shear his sheep. Admiring her boss, Manager Lee told Chen Mu that she saw how much he cared about his employees. Chen Mu cleared his throat, smiled awkwardly, and replied that it was good that the girl understood this. Our hero realized that something was wrong here because from a past life he knew about the existence of a hospital in the city of Wangjiang. The guy asked Li Xiaoxiao again if it was true that there was no special hospital for ghosts in the city. The girl nodded her head and replied that they had not yet received notifications about the appearance of a new horror scenario. The protagonist asked if she could really learn about new nightmare scenarios as soon as they appeared. A frightened Manager Lee asked Boss Chen if the guy was planning to seize a new horror scenario. Chen Mu stood up and ordered the manager to send several ghosts to monitor the abandoned hospital in the southern suburbs. Boss Chen smiled and told the girl to report to him immediately as soon as the ghost hospital appeared there. Li Xiaoxiao bowed her head to her boss and replied that she would arrange everything immediately. The blushing girl left the office with a smile on her face. She thought that the boss was truly incredible because he managed to predict in advance where the new scenario would appear. Soon, the purple car driven by Wang Guishi stopped near the ominous abandoned hospital. Wang Guishi and Chen Mu got out of the car. The driver asked the boss if he should accompany the guy to the horror hospital. The protagonist refused help. He simply told his personal driver to stay here and wait for his return. Chen Mu walked to the hospital door. He was in anticipation because a new nightmare scenario had finally begun. One of our hero's feet has already stepped onto the hospital grounds, breaking through the green protective barrier. The protagonist chuckled when he saw a notification from the apocalypse with the terms of a new nightmarish mission. Chen Mu is to become an intern doctor in this hospital. He will need to successfully complete his internship in order to complete the mission. The guy closed his eyes. He didn't like the mission because this hospital already had a low cure rate, and now he, an amateur, would be treating ghosts. Walking down the hospital corridor, the protagonist admitted that the atmosphere here was truly otherworldly. It was dark inside, and the walls were stained with bloody fingerprints. Chenmu concluded that he would encounter such handprints during every nightmare mission as standard decoration. A ghost nurse, her eyes glowing red, approached the boy and assumed that the new intern was standing in front of her. The main character was not scared when he saw the ghost with a syringe. He smiled, nodded his head, and confirmed that it was him. The ghost was surprised when she saw a smile on his face and asked the guy if he wasn't scared at all. Chenmu told the nurse that he had seen too much in his life, so he was used to such situations. The nurse took an interest in the new intern, recognizing that he was an interesting person, and asked him to follow her. The protagonist thought that this nurse was a very charming girl, compared to many of the monsters of the apocalypse. Chenmu smiled stupidly and concluded that he had indeed been living alone for too long to be staring at ghosts. The girl led our hero to the operating room on duty. She opened the door and told the guy that they had already arrived. The chief, entering the dark operating room on duty, noticed how strongly it smelled of blood inside. Inside, a doctor was already waiting for Chenmu. It was an elderly man with a bald head and a white coat who was on duty in the operating room today. The nurse introduced our hero to the head physician of their department, Director Tan from the Big Iron Bar Hospital. Director Tan extended his hand in a friendly manner to our hero and suggested that the new intern standing before him. The protagonist respectfully greeted Director Tong and introduced himself to him as Chenmu. The man handed the intern some documents and said that these were the rules of their operating room, which the guy needed to read carefully first. After reviewing the documents, Chenmu concluded that the very rules were hidden in this brochure. According to the rules, Director Tan never lies and always offers the ideal treatment plan. The intern must obey him unquestioningly and not leave the operating room while on duty. Chenmu will also need to cure 5 patients and receive 3 positive reviews from them to successfully complete the mission. The protagonist wondered how he could avoid angering these nervous, wounded ghosts and getting bad reviews. The nurse solicitously offered the new intern to sit down on a chair before the first patient arrived. The guy sat down on a chair, thanked the girl, and asked why there were still no patients in the operating room on duty. Director Tan asked the young man not to be so impatient because at night, naturally, there were fewer patients. Suddenly, a panicked ghost with a wounded arm burst into the operating room, screaming, begging the doctor to save him. Tong asked intern Chen to help immediately place the injured patient on the couch before examining him. The protagonist abruptly pushed the patient onto the couch, and the ghost continued to complain of pain and begged to be saved quickly. Director Tong asked Dr. Chen to first treat the patient with ghost flower oil and cotton balls. Chenmu began to do everything according to his instructions, and Tong advised him to wipe the wound smoothly and gently, making 3 circles to the left and 3 circles to the right. Tong praised our hero for a job well done and ordered that we simply apply a bandage, and that would complete the treatment. While bandaging the ghost's hand, Chenmu was at a loss. He felt like there was a catch somewhere, because everything was too simple. The ghost felt better. He thanked our hero for his help and was ready to leave the operating room. Chenmu smiled at the ghost and allowed him to leave, but advised him to remember to rest more to recover. The wounded patient rushed out of the operating room as if he didn't want to be there for another second. The main character didn't understand where the ghost was rushing to and wondered if he was really in a hurry to be reborn. The system stunned Chenmu, saying that the operation had failed because the boy had received a negative review. Chenmu was at a loss, not understanding why this was a failure because he thought he had done everything correctly. Director Tan smiled, trying to reassure our hero that he still had a chance to successfully complete the mission. The protagonist suspected that there was something wrong with the rules specified in the manual, since he had received negative feedback. The guy decided to simply ask Director Tan about it, since the rules stated that this man never lies. The older man opened his eyes and noticed the intern's gaze on him. He asked the guy why he was looking at him like that. Our hero asked Dr. Tung if he would tell him only the truth as stated in the rules in the documents. Director Tung replied that he would not deceive any of the intern doctors who were taking part in the nightmare mission. Chenmu then asked the doctor to answer the question of whether he was really as skilled as the rules said. Tong sighed heavily and replied that, in fact, his medical skills were very ordinary, and he did not expect such intelligence from Chenmu. Chenmu knew that personal rules had become stricter and the mission had become more difficult, but he would still have to listen to Tong's instructions during the next operations. Clutching the scalpel tightly in his hand, the boy wondered how he could find a way out, since he only had the right to make one mistake. The protagonist remembered the rule that he had to cure 5 patients, but it didn't specify where these patients were supposed to come from. He picked up the phone and decided to call the bandits he had recently hired. The 3 of them would be perfect for this job. The following events took place at night, on the territory of the Dark Knight School, which our hero had acquired the day before. Brother Jai and his partners sat in the courtyard and racked their brains over where they could get 3 patients for the boss so that they would leave him good reviews. Jai got angry at his partners and said that the patients were for the boss and called the guys stupid. They simultaneously looked in fascination at the beautiful girl with long hair who was walking past. The big man with the mohawk blushed when he saw the beauty. He found the girl very attractive. Brother Jai hit his partner for daring to stare at girls, because it would be better for him to break his arm and go to the boss on a mission. The boy admitted his guilt and screamed, begging Jia not to break his arm because he did not want to become a hospital patient. The fair-haired ghost stopped the girl, which frightened her, and said that it was dangerous for such a beauty to walk alone at night. Our hero's tough guys looked at each other and laughed ominously because they simultaneously realized who the boss's patient would be. Brother Ji and his partners approached the blonde man and his friends. Now there were exactly 3 patients for Chen Mu standing in front of them. They flexed their fists and asked the ghosts if they really dared to pester a defenseless ghostly girl in the middle of the night. The fair-haired guy looked at the big guys insolently and replied that he just wanted to, so he wasn't ashamed of it. He told Ji straight to her face that this girl had a good figure, and it was okay if he wanted to touch her a little. This blonde guy's friends supported him and started extorting money from Brother Ji until their leader got angry, and then they would be even. Brother Jai, his red eyes flashing, looked at the red-haired ghost with disdain and replied that he himself wanted to give them something. The blonde pointed his finger at Brother Ji, smiled nastily, and noted that this big guy did have some common sense. The muscular ghost swung his fist and attacked the blonde, declaring that he wanted to send ghosts to the next world. The other guys dealt with the other 2 hooligans for daring to be insolent, and they both collapsed on the asphalt. 3 patients were ready for Chen Mu. The guys were complaining of pain, someone had a beaten face, and someone had broken ribs and a leg. The girl bowed before the gang of 3 muscular guys and thanked them, adding that they were the true heroes of the Dark Knight School. The big guys were pleased that such a beautiful ghost girl praised them, and they carried the beaten ghost to their white van. Brother Ji pushed one of the hooligans into a white van to take them to the ghost hospital to see Chen Mu. He suggested to his partners that they first send the first patient to the hospital, and then the other 2, so that the doctors wouldn't become suspicious. His partners agreed and promised to obey their superior in everything. They guaranteed that they would not let down Boss Chen. Brother Jai and his team's white van raced along the night road to deliver the first patient to the ghost hospital. They soon stopped at the desired hospital in the southern suburbs, where their boss Chen is now involved in a terrible mission. Brother Jai opened the door of the white van, and inside sat beaten ghosts, with cloth sticking out of their mouths to prevent them from making unnecessary sounds. The red-haired hooligan was sweating with fear. Brother Ji told the boy to follow him as our hero's first patient. The ghost really didn't want to go to that hospital because he knew that 9 out of 10 patients there went to heaven. Brother Ji grabbed the boy's face and told him to remember that he would make him disappear right here if he disobeyed. The big man told the ghost, who was trembling with fear, to find a doctor named Chen Mu in the hospital, get treated by him, and leave a good review. He showed the ghost a wad of phantom bills and promised that he would give him the money if the boy left a good review for the doctor. Brother Jai said that he would wait here at the entrance, and this money would go towards the guy's funeral if he tried to deceive him. The frightened red-haired guy began to nod his head. He answered Brother Ji that this insignificant one understood everything. The muscular ghost kicked the guy and told him to get lost in the hospital, forcing him to cross the green barrier. The young man, crying from fear, looked into the operating room on duty and asked where Dr. Chen was, because he was the one he needed. The protagonist thought that Brother Jai had done a good job, as he had managed to find the patient in less than an hour. Dr. Tong was taken aback because the patient began to demand that Chen Mu take over his treatment specifically. The guy looked at the surprised doctor with a grin and thought that only the power of money had helped him with this. Chen Mu approached the ghost who needed medical attention and introduced himself to him, saying that he was an intern. The ghost couldn't stop crying because he saw a simple man in front of him and not a ghostly general, as he expected. The red-haired guy fell to his knees in front of Chen Mu and grabbed his legs. He complained that he just slipped and hit his face on the ground. The protagonist calmed the patient, saying that he would now cure him, and told the ghost to lie down on the couch. Chen Mu said that he would first disinfect the boy's wounds and then give him a prescription for red ointment so that he could treat it at home. The ghost thanked our hero for the honor of treating him personally and regretted that he had been wandering around at night. Director Tung was perplexed by this scene because doctors are not usually treated with such respect. While treating the wound on his face, Chen Mu asked the guy if it hurt, and he replied that he even enjoyed it because he wasn't pressing at all. The protagonist put aside the blood-soaked piece of cotton wool and allowed the guy to go because all the wounds had already been treated. The cheerful red-haired boy thanked Dr. Chen and said that he was now like a second father to him. Chen Mu smiled because this time he received a positive review from the patient. The rating was the highest. The guy turned out to be quite accommodating. Now, our hero just needed to get 2 more positive reviews, and he would complete the mission. 2 more wounded ghosts then entered the operating room on duty. They asked Dr. Chen for help, as they had been hit by a car. Dr. Tong was shocked again because new patients were again coming specifically to Chen Mu. The protagonist smiled ominously because the bastard who had crippled Chen Mu in his previous life appeared before him. The first one he decided to treat was the guy with blonde hair who looked at Dr. Chen with apprehension, not trusting him. Chen Mu clearly remembered how in his previous life, this blonde man stood in front of him and mocked him after he beat him up for playing the hero. Then the blonde man told the crippled Chen Mu that his friend promised to give him our hero's index finger as a trophy in exchange for his life. Now the main character had a sinister smile on his face because he was going to take revenge on the ghost for his finger. The ghost lay down on the couch and trembled with fear because this Dr. Chen's face was creepy, although he had not done anything to harm him. Dr. Tung stood frozen in shock, his mouth hanging open, as the protagonist grabbed the defibrillator pads to resuscitate the already living ghost. The protagonist pressed the electrodes against each other to charge them, and they began to sparkle with bright green lightning. While continuing to charge the electrodes, the guy looked at the patient ominously, smiled, and asked if he was ready for treatment. The ghost began to rush about in panic. He asked the doctor why he needed this device if he only had a broken rib. Getting ready to use the defibrillator, the protagonist asked if the ghost would really teach him how to do his own job. Chen Mu placed the electrodes on the patient's chest so that an electric current pierced his entire body. Smiling maliciously, the protagonist asked the patient to be patient for a little while, as the high voltage could cause him pain. Smoking after such an extreme procedure, the blonde looked at the doctor in shock, but did not argue anymore. Trembling with fear, the ghost tried to convince Dr. Chen that he was healthy and no longer needed treatment. Chen Mu didn't listen to him. He decided that the blonde was already suffering from hallucinations, which meant he needed to add more tension. The protagonist again presses 2 defibrillator electrodes against the patient's chest so that an electric current runs through his entire body. The third patient stood behind and watched this. His mouth open in shock, he understood that his friend was about to be seriously hurt. After the second procedure, the blonde man jumped up from the couch and opened his mouth, releasing a cloud of black smoke. Dr. Chen Mu overdid it when using the defibrillator, causing the blonde man to collapse onto the bed unconscious, his soul leaving his body. Our hero's patient no longer showed any signs of life. He opened his mouth, and his ghostly spirit emerged in the form of a small green cloud. The protagonist turned around and told the third patient that his friend's condition was too serious, so it seemed he had passed away. The third patient was scared. He knew that he too was at risk of going to heaven today, if the 3 at the entrance found out everything. The ghost knew he had only one choice if he wanted to get out of this hospital alive today. Dr. Tong, who was watching the situation from the side, guessed that the third patient was about to beat Chen Mu. He was wrong because the guy snatched the electrodes from Chen Mu's hands and started cursing at his friend for pretending to be dead during his appointment with Dr. Chen. The protagonist looked at the ghost with bewilderment, who decided to take matters into his own hands and ensure that Chen Mu received a good review. The ghost applied the defibrillator electrodes to his friend's chest and told him to wake up, otherwise he had no reason to live either. The boy tried his best to revive his friend and restart his ghostly heart, but so far without success. Dr. Tung couldn't help but burst into tears as the man was moved to tears by the sincere brotherly love. The ghost continued to try to restart his deceased friend's heart, and this time the blonde's mouth even opened slightly. The boy was stunned when he saw a powerful energy field surround the body of his deceased friend, bringing him back to life. He eventually managed to resurrect his brother. The blonde jumped out of bed and gasped in pain, his eyes and mouth wide open in shock. The stunned blonde stood up and asked Dr. Tung if he was still alive because he had already resigned himself to death. The protagonist's third patient began to cry with happiness when he saw that he had successfully restarted his friend's ghostly heart. Director Tung told our hero that it was a true miracle of medicine that he was able to save a patient in such a condition. The ghost grabbed his resurrected friend by the shoulders and told him to move and give Dr. Chen a good grade. He began to shake his brother vigorously by the shoulders so that he would not dare to lose consciousness again. And first of all, he left a good review for the doctor. The blonde man, still feeling dizzy from the treatment, looked at his friend with fear and stuttered as he agreed to do it. The ghost immediately gave the protagonist a good rating, which was taken into account by the system. Chen Mu received 100 points for the third operation. The protagonist was delighted to receive a positive response from the ghost, even though he had almost driven him to his grave with his treatment. The third patient was delighted to hear that his friend had managed to give our hero a good rating and threw him back onto the couch. The next moment, the ghost's life was finally cut short because it was only possible to revive him for a couple of minutes. Dr. Tung looked at our hero in bewilderment, not understanding who he even was or how he managed to get good grades so easily. Smiling, Chen Mu placed his hand on the third patient's shoulder and declared that it was time to treat his leg. Trembling with fear, the ghost told the doctor that he simply had a fracture, so he should not use the defibrillator. With a sly smile, Chen Mu replied that whether a defibrillator would be used or not depended on the patient's behavior. The ghost pushed his friend off the couch and, smiling, asked the doctor not to worry because he would cooperate. He lay down on the couch and allowed Dr. Chen to treat him as he wished, but asked that he be given the strength to give a good report. The protagonist frowned and told the third patient that his leg fracture was actually quite serious. Still trying to smile at the doctor, the patient replied that his broken leg was indeed in a lot of pain. Chen Mu admitted that there was a slight problem because the guy wasn't particularly strong in surgery. The ghost grabbed his hand and assured him that it was not the doctor's fault, because the boy himself was to blame for receiving this injury. The protagonist sighed heavily and replied to the ghost that he should at least disinfect the wound on his leg first. Chen Mu took a small piece of cotton wool soaked in the solution and applied it to the patient's skin, and he immediately felt relief. Dr. Chen concluded that this patient was clearly one of Brother G's actors, judging by his enthusiasm. The protagonist placed a used piece of cotton wool and tweezers on the tray and declared that this was the end of his authority. The satisfied patient limped off the couch and declared that he felt much better thanks to Dr. Chen. Chen Mu was reluctant to believe this, so he suggested that the ghost at least put a cast on his broken leg. The ghost winced in fear when he received such an offer and refused it, assuring that he felt fine as is. The boy began moving around the operating room on his hands, demonstrating that he could even run without using his legs. The third patient walked out of the office in his arms, saying goodbye to Dr. Chen, and his broken leg was still not healed. The protagonist asked the patient afterward whether he was really going to leave his brother here, whose body remained in the operating room. Chen Mu received a notification from the Apocalypse system that he had been given 100 points and 5 stars for the 4th operation. Director Tung looked at our hero with curiosity, concluding that the other 2 patients were definitely terrified of him. Our hero noticed the chief doctor's gaze on him and asked Director Tung if he had anything to say. The man clapped his hands in delight and admitted that he had several questions for the guy and would like to consult with him. Chen Mu didn't mind giving Director Tong some advice, so he agreed to listen carefully to the hospital employee. Director Tung asked what the guy did before, because it was clear that all of today's patients deeply respect him. The guy waved his hand and replied that there was nothing special about his activities. He was just an ordinary small businessman. A nurse entered the operating room on duty and told Dr. Chen that he had another patient, and Brother Ji carried him inside in his arms. Chen Mu was surprised to recognize this unfortunate man as the same patient who had given him a terrible rating. Brother Jai threw the patient onto the couch and asked Dr. Chen to examine the man who had slipped and knocked out a tooth. The man burst into tears and immediately admitted his guilt. He regretted giving our hero a bad grade. Chen Mu felt sorry for the patient and asked Brother Ji why he had to be beaten like that, and if he should have been hit, at least not in the face. Brother Jai bowed before the boss and admitted his guilt, justifying himself by saying that he had lost his temper a little. The protagonist smiled and quickly forgave Brother Jai and waved his hand, telling the big guy to wait for the boss outside. The muscular guy walked out of the operating room on duty, his eyes flashing red, and warned the patient that they would see each other again. The first patient began to beg our hero for mercy. He promised that he would immediately change that bad grade to a good one. The protagonist saw a notification that the first operation now earned him 100 points, and the review was changed to the best possible. Chen Mu decided to spare the first patient, which pleased the man, who allowed him to leave the operating room on duty. The man burst into tears of happiness, thanked Dr. Chen enormously, and called him a truly generous person. The first patient bolted from the operating room, and for the first time in his practice, Dr. Tung saw someone change their assessment. The head doctor looked at our hero and concluded that this was definitely not an ordinary businessman. The shift in the operating room on duty didn't end there. Another ghost entered the office in need of medical attention. The ghost complained to Chen Mu that he had a toothache and asked the doctor to examine his mouth. Dr. Tung, smiling ingratiatingly, asked our hero to take a rest, since he was already working without a break, and to let him take on this operation. Chen Mu looked at the head doctor in surprise and asked if he could really refuse the patient. Director Tong replied that there was nothing in the rules about such a prohibition, so the man could perform the operation himself instead of Chen Mu. The protagonist was pleased with this. He entrusted the next operation to Dr. Tung and sat down on a chair to rest. Before starting the operation, the head doctor asked his nurse to give Chen Mu a massage so that the doctor could rest. Chen Mu smiled with pleasure as the nurse began to knead his tired shoulders, asking if she was pressing too hard. The satisfied protagonist replied to the ghostly girl that everything was fine and that he clearly enjoyed receiving a massage from her. Meanwhile, Director Tung began providing medical care to a patient who came in complaining of a toothache. He wiped his sweaty forehead and announced that the examination was over and the patient could leave, but he should remember to give Dr. Chen a good rating. The guy stood up and, smiling, nodded his head several times, assuring that he would definitely give Chen Mu a good grade. The protagonist received a notification from the apocalyptic system that the 5th operation was completed. The rating was 100 points, and the review was 5 stars. Chen Mu, stretched after his tiring shift in the ghost hospital's operating room on duty, finally ended. Director Tung, smiling ingratiatingly, approached our hero and apologized for keeping him waiting. Our hero thanked the head doctor for his efforts and said that it was time for him to leave since the mission was accomplished. The head physician asked Dr. Chen to take his time, but the young man visibly tensed up and asked what else was required of him. Director Tong stated that Chen Mu was the first intern to complete the mission with a perfect score, and they had an extra reward for him. Chen Mu was visibly pleased by this news and was looking forward to receiving an additional bonus from the hospital. The following events were already unfolding in the office of the director of this hospital. A bright green light was visible behind the glass. At this time, the director was sitting in his office and studying our hero's file. The name Chen Mu seemed very familiar to him. He jumped up from his seat when he remembered that Chen Mu was the rich human who bought the Dark Knight School and the Mountain Water Estate. The director began to pace around his office and decided that he needed to sell the hospital to Chen Mu, and then he wouldn't have to worry about the future. The ghost straightened his jacket and smiled, deciding that he had to meet our hero right now, because time was money. The protagonist, Director Tung, and a nurse were standing in the hospital's reception area. The ghostly girl was holding something in her hand. She told Chen Mu that this was a Ghost Commander level item called Phantom Mist Spray. Director Tung handed this spray to our hero and explained that it would lock the horrors inside powerful hallucinations if you sprayed it on them. The man warned Chen Mu to be careful when using the spray, as the effect only lasted an hour. The protagonist happily accepted the additional prize and thanked Dr. Tung for the warning. The hospital director came out of his office and saw with his own eyes that the very same rich man Chen Mu had indeed come here. The man decided to start the acquaintance with a compliment and told Chen Mu that it was immediately obvious that he had completed his internship with brilliant results. Chief Dr. Tung and his nurse immediately bowed to their director, greeting him with smiles. Chen Mu's eyes lit up when he saw the director because he himself wanted to meet him today. The hospital director admitted that he watched our hero work and was impressed by his skills. The ghostly head of the hospital shook Chen Mu's hand in greeting, and the boy asked the director how he could be of service to him. The man replied that he thought that giving the spray as a reward for a perfect result was too simple, and he had prepared another special gift for the guy. In fact, the hospital director wanted to lure Chen Mu to become the next owner of the ghost hospital. The protagonist's smile widened when he heard from the hospital director that another additional gift was waiting for him. The hospital director expressed hope that our hero would not consider this bonus to be too modest. He took a pen out of his jacket pocket and said that this gift was a small token of his gratitude to Chen Mu. The nurse was shocked because the director gave Chen Mu his personal golden pen, and this thing was worth more than 100,000 ghost coins. Chen Mu looked at this gift with suspicion. He knew that the director clearly wanted something from him, since such expensive things were not something to be thrown away. But our hero still decided to accept this gift and smiled politely, saying that Director Lu was too kind to give such things at the very first meeting. Noting Dr. Chen's extraordinary talent, the director asked the young man if he had ever considered going deeper into the medical industry. Understanding what the man was getting at, the protagonist asked what the director meant by these words. Tong and his nurse were stunned. They realized that this stingy director wanted to push this whole mess onto the boy and hang his unprofitable hospital on Dr. Chen. The hospital director decided to confess honestly to the protagonist and asked Chen Mu to buy out the medical facility. Chen Mu was glad in his heart that one of the horrors was finally offering him a deal, but he asked the director why he was selling a normal hospital. The man honestly admitted to the boy that, in fact, this ghost hospital had been operating at a loss for quite some time. He complained that he had tried his best to fix the situation, but there was nothing more he could do, so he wanted to get rid of it. Grinning, the main character asked how much the director wanted to sell him this hospital for. Chen Mu knew that the apocalypse had just begun, and ordinary monsters couldn't afford hospital treatment, so the lack of profit was not surprising. The hospital director, he believed, had not asked for much since he was prepared to sell the institution for 800 million phantom coins. Tung and his nurse were shocked because they thought it was robbery on the part of the director and wanted to sue him. The main character did not like this proposal and accused the hospital director of not acting entirely honestly. Chen Mu asked if the man really wanted the boy to save his life by buying out the hospital and leave himself with nothing. The hospital director immediately broke into a sweat when he was exposed and said that bargaining was very appropriate in this situation. The man immediately lowered the price significantly and asked Chen Mu if he was willing to buy the hospital for 500 million ghost coins. The protagonist didn't answer, so he was forced to lower the price by another 400 million, and that was his final offer. Chen Mu concluded that the man was serious about selling the hospital, as he was willing to sell it for even 100 million. The hospital director was upset because he could tell from our hero's face that he wouldn't be able to buy this institution even for that kind of money. The man, wiping sweat from his face, asked Chen Mu to name his price if he was really interested in buying the hospital. The protagonist was willing to buy the hospital for 70 million ghost coins and pay cash on the spot. The director agreed and asked the guy to show him the full amount in ghost coins, after which they could sign the contract. Chen Mu snapped his fingers to activate his epic spatial ring and took out the money from the vault. He spread his arms out to the sides and declared that the money was here, when a whole mountain of ghostly coins appeared behind his back. The hospital staff were stunned because the guy had so easily shelled out such a huge amount of money, and the nurse could not even dream that such an eligible bachelor would come to them. The protagonist asked the hospital director to bring him a contract, after signing which Chen Mu would become the new owner. The happily smiling ghost happily handed our hero the ghost contract, as he was convinced of the guy's wealth. Chen Mu picked up the phantom contract and began to carefully read the document to ensure its integrity. When the boy signed the contract, the paper began to turn into streams of dark energy, which were sucked into Chen Mu's body. The system notified Chen Mu that his strength had reached the level of a senior ghost commander, and a new skill called Embodiment of Terror had been unlocked. A satisfied smile appeared on Chen Mu's face, because this skill would give him the ability to become a horror for 5 minutes. The protagonist already wanted to test this skill in practice, but not here, but in some secluded place. The hospital director flattered our hero, as reaching the level of a senior ghost commander at such an age is incredible. Chen Mu thanked Director Liu for being willing to part with the hospital, as the boy had wanted to buy it anyway. He asked the man if he should call someone for help, because it would be difficult to carry away such a mountain of ghost coins on his own. The happy ghost asked Mr. Chen not to worry about it, because he had already arranged everything himself. Liu began to transfer all the money onto the couch himself, and declared that from now on, the entire hospital belonged only to Chen Mu. Leaving the hospital with all the money, the man wished our hero prosperity for his business and endless profits. The protagonist thought that the man would not have long to rejoice, because soon this hospital would bring in huge profits. Chen Mu asked Tong where the hospital director's office was because he wanted to go there. The nurse didn't give Tong any time to respond, but she jumped forward and offered to take Chen Mu to the director's office personally. Director Tong also wanted to escort our hero, so he pushed the nurse aside and asked the boy to let him accompany him. The protagonist waved his hand and replied that it would be better for the doctor to stay in the operating room, since doctors are not allowed to leave its confines unless necessary. The nurse warned Chen Mu that he would have to walk up to the 5th floor because there was no elevator in this hospital. Dr. Tong cried with resentment. If he had known, he would have also gone to study nursing to be closer to Chen Mu. Soon the nurse and Chen Mu went up to the 5th floor. The girl showed him the door that led to the director's office. When the main character entered a completely empty office, the guy concluded that Director Liu had been preparing to sell this place for a long time. The boy scratched his chin and thought that Director Liu wouldn't have cleaned everything up so thoroughly in advance for another reason. Chen Mu chuckled as he walked up to the director's desk and noticed a large blue book lying there. He picked up the book, and from the title, he realized that it was a list of practicing doctors. The guy wanted to check if there were any familiar names in it. When he saw in the book that the success rate of the operations was only 10%, questions about the reasons for the hospital's unprofitability disappeared. The boy's eyes widened in surprise when he came across a ghost on the list of doctors that seemed familiar to him. On one of the pages of the book, he found a photograph of a doctor wearing glasses, and after a few seconds, Chen Mu remembered who he was. The nurse noticed Chen Mu staring at the photo and asked if he knew the intern. The main character turned around and looked at the girl in surprise, because he didn't know that this person worked as an intern. The ghost nurse told the new boss that this man had started working at their hospital just a few days ago. Chen Mu wanted to meet him immediately, so he asked the girl where this man was now. The nurse replied that Director Liu had sent the intern to the warehouse to keep order there. Our hero got angry, threw the book, and ordered the nurse to bring the intern here immediately, because it was impossible to send this man to the warehouse. The girl was afraid of the new director's anger and immediately ran away to bring this intern here right away. Chen Mu calmed down, sat down at the table, and admitted that he was surprised to meet the legendary unkillable doctor of the late apocalypse here. The guy agreed that there was logic to this because no one would have guessed now to see incredible abilities in this intern. The protagonist decided that the legendary doctor would now work for him so that his abilities could be revealed. Soon, the nurse came into the office and reported that she had brought Chen Mu, their hopeless doctor. Chen Mu was delighted and allowed the legendary doctor, who was still considered a failure, to enter the office. The ghost girl introduced their new director to Dr. Z and told him that Chen Mu had just purchased the hospital. Dr. Z wiped his hand on his white coat before walking up to his new boss and extending his hand to greet him. The warehouse intern, stuttering with excitement, greeted Director Chen, extending his hand for a handshake. The protagonist asked the guy to stop being nervous and said that he just wanted to ask the intern a few questions. Dr. Z stopped being so worried and did not mind the director asking him any questions. Chen Mu asked why the intern was assigned to guard the warehouse, since Ji had carried out many successful operations and had excellent results. The intern replied that horror equipment was extremely expensive and he used it almost more than everyone else combined. A frustrated Dr. Z said Director Liu scolded the boy for using the equipment and forbade him from performing operations. The nurse also complained to the new boss about Director Liu, who always squeezed every last drop out of the staff for his own benefit. The protagonist reassured them, saying that these problems were now a thing of the past, since the hospital was now his. He sat down at the table and waved his hand over it, activating the ring, and also promised not to shortchange the employees as long as they did their job well. 10 red envelopes appeared on the table. Chen Mu asked the nurse to distribute them to each hospital staff member on his behalf. The girl was delighted, took all the envelopes, thanked the new boss, and promised that she would definitely take care of it. Dr. Zai began to like the new director because he showed such generosity in giving bonuses to the doctors. The protagonist admitted to the intern that, in his opinion, the level of medical care provided in this hospital was extremely low. The intern looked at the hospital director in bewilderment and asked what he was getting at by making such a statement. Chen Mu said that he believed in Dr. Zi's skills and therefore wanted to entrust him with the management of the hospital in the future. Dr. Zai was startled and asked if Director Chen was joking, since just a couple of minutes ago he was just a warehouse security guard. Our hero patted the doctor on the shoulder and asked if he looked like a joker, making it clear that he was absolutely serious. The intern felt awkward taking on such a responsibility, smiled nervously, and declined his boss's offer. Chen Mu allowed the guy to just say it out loud if something was bothering him, because he still wanted to see Dr. Z in the director's place. Zai said that it would take a lot of money to get everything up to speed at the hospital, and only after a lot of development and research would it be possible to make any profit. The intern scratched his head and expressed concern that the new director's budget would not be able to handle the scale of work at the hospital. The protagonist asked if Dr. Zai was worried about anything other than time and money, because Chen Mu was certainly not frightened by budget issues. Dr. Xi modestly replied to the new director that nothing else was bothering him, and that the problems of money and time remained the most important. Chen Mu spread his arms wide and declared that he would give the intern 6 months to turn this place into the best hospital in the entire ghost world. A stunned Xi asked the director if he was serious, since the funding would cost at least hundreds of millions. This didn't frighten Chen Mu. He smiled and replied that it was just money, after which he activated the ring and snapped his fingers. A moment later, hundreds of thousands of phantom coins appeared on the table. Chen Mu decided to invest in Dr. Ji so that he would not have to worry about funding. Our hero asked the intern what he thought now that he saw a whole mountain of real ghost coins in front of him. A stunned Dr. Z concluded that the new director of their hospital was completely different from the previous, short-sighted, tight-fisted people. Chen Mu decided to clear things up right away and warned the intern that he was not going to pay him his salary. This news did not upset Dr. Zai at all, and he stated that he would be happy to work for free if he had the opportunity to hone his skills. The protagonist put his hand on his shoulder and said that he could only dream of working for free since he would receive 1% of the shares of this hospital. The humble doctor did not like this idea and replied that it was too generous a reward for his work. Chen Mu smiled and stated that he believed in Ji's love for medicine and his ability to achieve phenomenal results in his work. Our hero knew that in the future, the doctor would become someone who treated horrors on the level of the Ghost King, and having such a person under his command was much more important than money. Dr. Z promised the director that he would make every effort to raise the hospital's medical standards as soon as possible. The protagonist had no doubt that this legendary doctor would achieve results, and once again encouraged the intern. The guy was overjoyed because he had only shared a tiny portion of the profits, and now in the future, this miracle doctor would be securely tied to him. Dr. Zai wanted to discuss something else with the director, namely the acute shortage of patients for clinical trials. The intern became noticeably sad and told his boss that without real practice, it would be extremely difficult to improve the overall level of treatment. The protagonist patted him on the shoulder and asked the intern not to worry about this either, but to entrust this matter to him. Dr. Ji looked at his director in surprise because he did not expect that he would take on this problem as well. Chen Mu asked the boy if he had ever wondered why there were so few patients in their ghost hospital. The intern looked sadly at the floor and suggested that no one came here because of the low patient survival rate. The protagonist agreed that this was one of the reasons for the shortage of patients, but the main reason was completely different. Dr. Z looked at the new director in bewilderment and asked why so few ghosts visited their hospital. Before Chen Mu could answer, the intern himself had guessed that most of the horrors simply could not afford such expensive treatment. Chen Mu smiled and confirmed the intern's suspicions that the cost of treatment was the hospital's main problem. Boss Chen said that he checked the old records, and it turned out that ghosts paid 2,000 ghost coins even for a simple bandage on a wound. Therefore, the protagonist decided that from today on, every ghost should have the opportunity to pay for their own medical care. Dr. G covered his eyes with his hand because Chen Mu began to emit a dazzling light like a saint. The intern asked if the ghosts would avoid visiting the hospital even more, thinking it was some kind of scam due to the low prices. The protagonist replied to Dr. Z that there was no talk of free treatment for ghosts, and he had something completely different in mind. Chen Mu announced that he was going to launch an exclusive benefit program for ordinary ghosts, namely health insurance. Dr. Z looked at his new boss in bewilderment because he had never heard of such a thing as health insurance before. Our hero tried to explain and called it a financial product. The horrors will pay 10 coins for entry and receive free treatment. The intern, who was not entirely convinced of the idea, asked Director Chen if it was really possible to organize it. Chen Mu waved his hand and asked him not to worry, because he was confident of the success of this idea, and told the guy to get to work. Dr. Ji bowed his head before our hero and declared that he would immediately organize all his plans. The guy knew that 10 ghost coins was not much for a middle-class horror, but there would always be those who would try to beat the system. The protagonist decided that such smart guys could be used as test subjects for the doctors at their hospital. The ghosts of the city have already begun to discuss the fact that the hospital recently launched some kind of financial product for affordable treatment. It turns out that everyone in the horror world is already talking about it, because buying health insurance provides the ghost with free treatment for life. One of the ghosts asked his friend if he wanted to try buying insurance too, since 10 coins wasn't that expensive. The guy called his friend an idiot and replied that there was no such thing as a free lunch, and that in this hospital, they would be turned into mincemeat. The ghost called his friend a coward and said that he would go to the hospital himself to buy health insurance. Soon the main character met with a hospital nurse and asked the girl how things were going. The girl delighted her boss by reporting that their new health insurance was a phenomenal success among the ghosts. Boss Chen was surprised that the insurance had become a success so quickly, as it had only been 1 day since its launch. The nurse said that they opened sales only yesterday, and since then patients have been visiting the hospital in droves. The protagonist asked how many patients the hospital doctors had been able to see over the past 24 hours. The girl looked at the journal and replied that so far they had received 200 people, 30 of whom had managed to survive. Chen Mu was delighted when he heard these statistics, because before this, the success rate of operations was much lower. Our hero concluded that the doctors at this hospital were not hopeless, because they had significantly improved the results within 24 hours. Director Chen told the nurse to continue selling health insurance and promised to cover all expenses. The nurse was happy when she heard this. She smiled and told the new boss that she understood everything. Chen Mu looked at the data and thought that at this rate, all the ghosts in the horror world would know about this hospital. Someone knocked on the door of the director's office. Our hero, being in a good mood, allowed this person to enter. A ghost, a middle-aged man, appeared at the threshold of the director's office and joyfully greeted Mr. Chen. The protagonist told the man that the examination rooms were on the first floor if he had come here for medical help. The man entered the office and replied that Chen Mu had misunderstood him because he did not come here as a patient. Smiling radiantly, the blonde handed Director Chen his business card and asked the guy to look at it. The protagonist took the business card and saw that Li Kun, the chairman of the Ghost Subway, was standing in front of him. From his past life, the guy knew very well that the metro is the most popular form of public transport among ghosts after taxis. Chen Mu was perplexed because he had not yet gotten used to the fact that horrors themselves came to him to discuss business. The protagonist stood up from his chair when he realized that the respected ghost was standing in front of him and smiled at Chairman Li. Li shook the guy's hand and smiled as well, replying that compared to Chen Mu, he was just small fry. Chen Mu asked the man to sit opposite him so that they could continue their conversation. He was glad to listen to the distinguished guest. When Chairman Li sat down on the chair opposite him, Chen Mu asked what brought the man here to see him today. First, Li placed a box on the table and asked him not to rush, because he wanted to give Chen Mu a gift as a token of his gratitude. Chen Mu liked this because before he had to give gifts to everyone, but now he himself began to receive them. When Chairman Li opened the box, our hero saw an expensive gold watch in front of him. Li heard that our hero loved watches, so he walked around the entire Fallen Mall and chose these ones. He hoped that the guy would like them. The protagonist noted the chairman's attentiveness. He was truly happy to receive an expensive watch as a gift. Now Chen-mu suggested that the man move on to the real reason for his visit, since he clearly hadn't come just to give a gift. Like the hospital director, Chairman Lee decided to directly admit to our hero that he wanted to sell him the ghost subway. Chen-mu was surprised because, as far as he knew, the ghost subway had always been a stable profit maker. Chairman Lee explained that for a long time, profits had barely covered staff salaries and subway maintenance costs. The man, who was clearly tired of running such an enterprise, asked Chen-mu if he understood what it was like. The protagonist tried to calm him down and asked him not to be so nervous, replying that he knew perfectly well what it was like. Lee firmly declared that he would become our hero's most loyal subordinate if he agreed to purchase the ghost subway. The man promised Chen-mu that the subway would become a gold mine in the future, even though his current income was nowhere near that of our hero's other businesses. Chairman Lee stood up from his chair and once again asked the protagonist to buy the ghost subway. Chen-mu smiled and again asked the man to sit down and calm down, seeing the ghost become agitated again. The director of the ghost subway sat back down at the table and apologized to Chen-mu for losing his temper a little. The protagonist enjoyed his authority among the ghosts. He realized that being surrounded by horrors was not at all bad. Lee sat there, hunched over with tension, sweat pouring down his face, but Chen-mu decided to reassure him, saying that he was interested in the proposal. However, the protagonist needed to examine everything carefully before making a final decision. Chairman Lee was delighted and replied that he would be honored to show Director Chen everything in person when he was free. The protagonist stood up and declared that there was no point in wasting time. He needed to go to the metro and see everything there right now. Lee was only too happy to show off his business to our hero right now. He stood up and escorted Director Chen to the exit. At that moment, a whole line of ghosts had formed at the reception desk in the hospital lobby, wanting to buy health insurance. They all turned around at the same time when someone asked Boss Chen to be careful on the steps. The two ghosts were displeased to see Chairman Lee fawning over the common man like a dog. Chairman Lee really did grovel before our hero. He escorted him through the hospital, letting him go first, and smiled. The ghosts looked with disdain at the man who was disgracing the entire ghost world by behaving like this with an ordinary person. One of the ghosts stopped his friend, saying that in fact this was not an ordinary person but the famous Director Chen. Then the guy who criticized Chairman Lee for his behavior began to regret that he had not been in his place. The friend told the ghost that he could only dream, because dust like them would never come near such a person. The curly-haired ghost was upset and wondered when luck would finally smile on him. One of the horrors in the line advised the guy to catch the criminal whose portrait was hanging on the wall in order to make money. It was Wu Ma-zi, a ghost general of rank, who was wanted for a series of robberies of jewelry and gold shops, and a reward of 100,000 ghost coins was promised for his capture. The ghost was indignant that the idiot jailers had missed a 5-star criminal because they hadn't been looking where they were. He said that according to rumors, the muscular and dangerous ghost Wu Ma-zi had recently been seen in Wangjiang. This frightened the curly ghost because last time they lost a second-rank ghost general while trying to catch Wu Wazi. The guy understood that the reward for capturing Wu Wazi would only increase if such a small fry as they dared to approach the criminal. A friend advised him not to worry about things that did not concern him, but rather to pray to get out of this torture chamber alive. The frightened curly-haired ghost agreed with his friend and replied that it was fair. He was also afraid of not surviving in this hospital. Outside, Chairman Lee apologized to Chen-mu for the long wait, as he had ordered a car to take him to the subway. Lee asked Chen-mu to wait just one more minute, and he would hurry the driver so that he would arrive faster. The protagonist interrupted him and replied that there was no need to do that because his personal driver was already there. The purple taxi driven by Wang Guishi stopped in front of Chen-mu and Chairman Lee. The local subway chairman's eyes widened in surprise when he saw that Director Chen owned a ghost taxi. Wang Gui got out of the car and carefully opened the door for his boss, asking him to take his honorable passenger seat. It was to be expected from Director Chen, but Chairman Lee was still surprised that the guy was using a ghost taxi as his personal transportation. Wang Guishi then approached the man, smiled politely at Lee, and asked him to also take the passenger seat in the car. The ghost looked at the driver with fear and meekly agreed to get into the car, tensing up from Wang Guishi's eerie appearance. When the driver got behind the wheel, Old Man Guishi asked the boss where he needed to be taken next. Chen-mu smiled and asked his personal driver to take him to the main terminal of the ghost subway, while Chairman Lee still felt uneasy. Chairman Lee was shocked again when he saw that our hero's personal driver was wearing the same watch as Director Chen himself. The ghost turned pale and thought that he was finished, because among these respected personalities he felt like a complete clown. Soon the car stopped in front of the main terminal building of the ghost subway. Chen-mu and Chairman Lee got out of the car. The man pointed his hand in the direction and asked Chen Mu to go in that direction, and our hero's mood became more gloomy. Inside, the guy saw three girls who found themselves on a nightmare mission. One of them told the others to stop crying. The protagonist came closer and immediately guessed that these girls had not come here of their own free will, but were on a mission. Chairman Lee confirmed his suspicions and happily announced that the nightmarish mission was about to begin. Chen Mu also saw a notice from the apocalyptic system in front of him, so he too would have to take part in the mission. According to the mission's rules, participants will work as conductors, serving passengers in the train cars, but a tall and handsome guy named Chen Mu can complete the mission immediately. The protagonist asked the chairman if Chen Mu had technically already completed the nightmarish mission. Lai replied that Chen Mu was his honored guest, so the guy wouldn't have to work as an ordinary conductor on the ghost subway. The girls who were unfortunate enough to be part of the mission were outraged that Chen Mu was given a free pass. One of them thought about it after reading the rules of the nightmare mission, because Chen Mu's name seemed very familiar to her. The second member of the mission remembered that Chen Mu was the same rich man who had pulled off a bunch of crazy business deals. She convinced the other girls that it was definitely him because her sister goes to the same school as the main character. The pink-haired girl looked at our hero with loving eyes. She dreamed of entering into a relationship with him to escape the suffering of the apocalypse. The ghostly subway employee told the participants to keep their mouths shut and stop talking during the mission. The three girls turned pale with fear and huddled close to each other, trembling, because the ghost was behaving in a frightening way. The subway employee herself, with a blush on her face, looked at Chen Mu, but in reality she was angry at the girls because they were hoping for a relationship with our hero. Soon, a subway train stopped at the platform. The doors had not yet opened, but the mission participants were already shaking violently with fear. Chairman Lee greeted Boss Chen on board the subway car, and the young man looked around warily. When Chen Mu entered the carriage, he saw several passengers from the ghost world taking their seats in front of him. The protagonist thought that there weren't that many passengers, which was important because he came to assess the metro's profitability. Chairman Lee was furious when he received the call, shouting into the phone at the idiots and asking if they were going to work at all. Chen Mu noticed this and asked the subway director if they were having any problems. Lee apologized to Boss Chen and said that he needed to go to the restroom and that the guy should sit down and wait for him for a bit. The protagonist was not against letting the man go. He smiled and allowed him to go and sort everything out. The director of the Ghost Metro was delighted, thanked the protagonist for his understanding, and promised to handle the matter quickly. Chen Mu was taken aback when he saw Chairman Lee suddenly jump up and run towards the exit of the carriage. Our hero was perplexed, not understanding why the metro director had suddenly started twitching so abruptly. The guy decided to take the opportunity and walk around the entire train to check the condition of the rest of the subway cars. He saw that three girls had already begun their mission. Although they were trembling with fear, they were serving the train passengers. When the main character passed by a fat passenger, the latter called him a rat and ordered him to bring him some water. Chen Mu looked down at the insolent fat man, pointed at his face, and wanted to confirm whether he had really said that to him. The ghost became even more angry and asked if Chen Mu had a hearing problem. He told him to hurry up and get some water. The mission participants looked cautiously at our hero, noticing that the guy had some problems with the passenger. One of the girls doubted that Chen Mu would have any serious problems because he was rich. The second girl was more worried about our hero because wealth will not help him. It is impossible for an ordinary person to overcome a ghost. The other passengers decided to get away because the chubby idiot reeked of alcohol and was clearly itching to get his fists in. A subway employee stood up for Chen Mu, apologized to the passenger, and asked him to let her help him, since the guy was not on staff. The angry, flushed ghost stood up and replied that he didn't care because he was going to beat the guy up right now. The man pushed the Ghost Metro employee back and told her to get lost and mind her own business. Luckily, the red-haired ghost girl stayed on her feet because our hero caught her in time. The girl blushed when she looked at Chen Mu and realized that he had saved her. She mentally thanked her hero. She looked at him in fascination and smiled when Chen Mu once again showed concern and asked if she was hurt. The ghost subway employee looked away in embarrassment and stuttered that she was fine. The protagonist understood that the metro would stop working if everyone and their dog started throwing around the employees, so he stood up for her. The fat ghost continued to rage, accusing our hero of pretending to be a knight in front of the beauty. Chen Mu looked at him with displeasure and replied that the security here was really bad, allowing such scum into the carriages. The subway passenger became even more angry when the protagonist dared to call him scum. The ghost rushed forward, thrusting his fist forward, wanting to punch Chen Mu's face for insulting him. The protagonist dodged back a little to avoid the fist hitting his face, but he was not at all afraid of the ghost's attacks. The rowdy passenger never managed to hit his attacker because someone grabbed his arm. It was the disgruntled Chairman Lee who managed to return in time, stopped the ghost, and asked what he had done here. The chubby ghost was stunned when he saw the director of the Nightmare Metro himself in front of him. He immediately shouted that it was all one big misunderstanding, and in fact he just wanted to teach this little man a lesson. Director Lee became angry and shouted, asking who he was to have the right to teach Boss Chen. The fat man was stunned with horror when he realized that the person standing in front of him was not an ordinary person, but the famous rich man Chen Mu. He immediately realized that he was finished. Now he would not even have a grave after he angered this influential man. The unruly passenger on the ghost subway fell to his knees and began banging his head on the floor, begging Boss Chen to have mercy on him. Chairman Lee was already flexing his fists. He said that it was too late to apologize, and now he would teach the ghost a lesson so that he would know how to be rude to the boss. The protagonist stopped the metro director by grabbing his hand and advised him not to dirty his hands with this ghost. Director Lee warned Chen Mu that this ghost might become a problem for them later if they didn't beat it up properly right now. Chen Mu smiled and replied that everything was fine, and he was definitely not afraid of any low-level horror. Our hero showed mercy, waved his hand and declared that the violent ghost was free. Now he could go. Chairman Lee yelled at the ghost because he was just lucky that Boss Chen was such a magnanimous person. The director of the Ghost Metro ordered the unruly passenger to disappear from his sight immediately. The man thanked our hero for his mercy and declared that Chen Mu was indeed the king of hell in the flesh. The subway employee kept looking lovingly at the main character and noted the big boss's generosity. Director Lee supported her and stated that Boss Chen's scale of thinking was at a level that they would never achieve in their lives. The rowdy passenger took advantage of the moment and ran away, and Chen Mu asked them not to exaggerate because that bully was just a ghost soldier. The plump ghost fled to another carriage, still blaming himself for making a mistake and not recognizing Chen Mu as the famous boss. The man was glad that the protagonist did not hold a grudge against him because he understood that otherwise, he would have already gone to heaven. A passenger sitting next to him heard the man's thoughts and asked which Boss Chen he was talking about. The ghost explained that he was talking about that very Chen Mu who was buying up all the nightmare zones, and this shocked the guy next to him. The fat man laughed when the passenger suggested that Chen Mu had come to carry out a mission because a rich man would definitely not do such a thing. The man told the boy that Chen Mu had come here to negotiate with Chairman Lee to buy out the ghost subway. The ghost became angry again and grabbed the hand of the mysterious passenger who stepped on his foot as he passed by. The ghost, who had been hiding his face behind a mask, turned around and made it clear to the man that he didn't see any problem with this. But the ghost could not be stopped. He again ran into conflict and ordered the man to kneel before him and apologize. The passenger tore off his disguise and asked the man again if he really wanted him to kneel in front of him. The fat man was terrified and screamed when the mask came off and he saw in front of him a famous criminal named Wu Ma-zi. Wu Ma-zi immediately rushed forward and attacked the rude man. He smiled ominously and was glad that his victim knew his name. The man screamed in horror when he looked down and noticed that he had been seriously injured by a dangerous criminal. The criminal disgustedly pushed away the passenger he had so skillfully dealt with, and the fat man began to fall on the guy. The blonde man who witnessed the horrific scene began to scream in horror as the passenger's lifeless body fell right onto his lap. Meanwhile, the protagonist asked Chairman Lee what happened because the day before he suddenly jumped up and ran away. The man admitted that, according to information he had just received, a wanted high-ranking criminal had entered their city. Chen Mu was visibly frightened when he heard this, because there were no such precedents in his previous life in the apocalypse. Chairman Lee revealed that the criminal's name was Wu Ma-zi, and he was one of the most dangerous criminal elements in the horror world. The protagonist and Lee exchanged frightened glances when they heard loud screams coming from the next car of the ghostly subway. They became even more frightened when, a moment later, they saw before them the very same Wu Ma-zi they had just spoken about. Chairman Lee panicked. He realized that they were in big trouble because Wu Ma-zi had been hiding in their subway all this time. The girls also panicked, screaming and asking for help because they didn't want to die. And the metro employee was afraid she wouldn't be able to pay off her mortgage. The director of the ghost subway shouted, ordering his subordinate to immediately activate the emergency brake to stop the train. Wu Ma-zi looked at the director from under his brows, his red eyes flashing, and released his sinister energy, not wanting to let Lee go. These streams of purple mist rapidly approached the chairman, who froze in the middle of the carriage in fear. A dangerous criminal deliberately attacked the metro director straight in the forehead. A mark appeared on his face. He froze, clenching his teeth. The protagonist decided to stand up for the chairman. He pushed him aside so that Wu Ma-zi could not attack him in close combat. Director Lee complained that Wu Ma-zi used his skill to block his authority over the subway area. Maisie licked his knife and advised the boys to put an end to this circus. He promised to let everyone live if they handed the man over to him. Chairman Lee was ready to protect our hero with his life. He covered his back and declared that Wu Ma-zi would not lay a finger on Boss Chen. The criminal laughed and replied that Lee was just a first-level ghost commander, and he definitely couldn't stop him. He pointed a knife at the subway director and ordered him to get out of the way, since Wu Ma-zi's goal was to get Chen Mu. The protagonist remained calm. He stopped Chairman Lee and said that the man had already done more than enough. Chen Mu boldly stepped forward, and the subway director asked the guy to stand behind him, promising that he could handle Wu Ma-zi. The guy waved his hand and asked Lee to stop worrying because he had a lucrative offer for the criminal. Not afraid of the armed evil giant, he took a step closer and asked if he was really the same Wu Ma-zi that all the horrors were whispering about. Wu Ma-zi smiled, his red eyes flashing, and guessed that Chen Mu was already shaking in his boots, as he had nowhere to run. A completely calm Chen Mu asked Wu Ma-zi if he didn't feel sorry for wasting his phenomenal strength on stealing. Smiling, our hero offered the criminal to start working for him, and in exchange, Boss Chen would post his bail. The protagonist understood perfectly well that Wu Ma-zi was incredibly strong, and the presence of such a ghost on the team would ensure the safety of his entire business. Chairman Lee realized that Chen Mu was a man worth holding on to because he offered even such a scumbag a chance to improve. Wu Ma-zi did not take our hero's proposal seriously. The phantom criminal burst into laughter throughout the entire carriage. Director Lee tensed up when the criminal started laughing loudly and ominously, and he asked Boss Chen to act preemptively and attack Wu Ma-zi. A legendary criminal of the highest danger level asked our hero if he really wanted him to work for him. Chen Mu offered Wu Ma-zi to swear allegiance to him, and then the boy would pay him 1,000,000 ghost coins every year. Chairman Lee wondered how deep Boss Chen's pockets were that he could easily offer such a huge salary. The protagonist asked the criminal if he had thought about the offer, and Wu Ma-zi still stood silently in front of him. The criminal replied that he wasn't even going to think about it because he wasn't ready to work a day in his life. With a sinister smile, Wu Ma-zi declared that he would spend the money he had stolen with his own hands. Noting the dangerous ghost's principled nature, Chen Mu said that he would no longer bother with persuasion. Wu Ma-zi rushed forward, his sharp knife ready, and demanded that Chen Mu give him his money or else he would go to heaven. The director of the Ghost Metro was once again ready to protect our hero at the cost of his life. He covered him with his back. The dangerous criminal kicked Chairman Lee and told the idiot that he was too weak to fight him. This turned out to be true, because the Metro director could not withstand even one blow from the criminal. He immediately fell to his knees. The protagonist asked a subway employee to do him a favor and take Chairman Lee to a safe place. The girl helped the director up, and he asked Chen Mu to be careful because Wu Ma-zi was at the level of a ghost general. Chen Mu smiled and said that he had tried to talk to Wu Ma-zi in a good way, but it seemed that now he would have to do it in a bad way. Chen Mu's threats didn't frighten him, because our hero is just a senior ghost commander, and he will easily become his next trophy. The protagonist looked indifferently at the blade of Wu Ma-zi's knife, which was rapidly approaching him. All it took for the guy to do was make a light wave of one hand to knock the bladed weapon out of the dangerous criminal's hands. Wu Ma-zi was shocked. He certainly didn't expect that this weak boy would be able to knock the knife out of his hand, demonstrating phenomenal abilities. The protagonist was glad to finally find the perfect time to test out the new skill he had acquired from the Apocalypse system. Chen Mu activated the Embodiment of Terror skill, and now he himself turned from a human into a ghost for 5 minutes. The boy's hair turned light and his eyes turned red. His new ghostly body was surrounded by a sphere of energy. The dumbfounded, dangerous criminal stuttered and asked the protagonist where he got this nightmarish skill from. The subway employee and her boss were also shocked because Chen Mu was practically at the level of a ghost general, and his aura was eerie. Wu Ma-zi began to realize that he was now in big trouble because Chen Mu's aura seemed creepy even to him. The main character, smiling, extended his hand to the frightened ghost and asked if he was afraid to come closer to him. Chen Mu declared that their dear and invincible Wu Ma-zi was a pathetic coward who only had the strength to mock the weak. Wu Ma-zi told the puppy not to get cocky, because he was still a pathetic person who couldn't defeat a purebred ghost. The criminal tried to hit the guy with his fist, threatening to immediately put him on his knees and force him to beg for mercy. The blow had no effect on Chen Mu, who laughed and advised Wu Ma-zi to apply at least a little force. Wu Ma-zi's tension increased because he had just used all his strength, but Chen Mu had not even flinched from the blow. It was time for a counterattack. The protagonist charged his fist with a ghostly aura and wanted Wu Ma-zi to taste it now. Chen Mu managed to hit Wu Ma-zi in the face on the first try. The criminal turned his head because the blow was impressive. The protagonist managed to leave a mark on the face of the invincible criminal, who coughed and groaned after a strong blow. Moreover, with a single punch, Chen Mu managed to knock the big guy down so that he fell onto the seats. The subway worker was shocked to see Chen Mu's insane strength, because before that she thought he was just a rich man. She couldn't stop staring at him with loving eyes because Chen Mu seemed like the perfect man to her. The protagonist, still in a ghost state, looked at his opponent with a grin, waiting for his answer. The boy looked at Umazi mockingly and asked if he could still stand on his feet. Umazi hung his head in shame and trembled, telling Chen Mu not to be arrogant, as he had simply been careless enough to relax. The protagonist found the criminal's answer curious and asked if his face hurt after his blow. The legendary fugitive could no longer hold back his tears, but he screamed, refusing to admit that he was in any pain. Smiling even wider, Chen Mu allowed Wu Mazi to cry if he was in pain, as there was nothing shameful about it. Wiping away bitter tears, the criminal told our hero to stop talking, because now he would show the guy what he was really capable of. The threats did not frighten Chen Mu. He even allowed the criminal to strike first because he was confident in his strength. Maisie found the strength to get up and swing his fist again in a frenzy to try to hit our hero. Chen Mu, crossing his arms over his chest, calmly took a step back, causing Wu Mazi's fist to miss completely. The legendary robber found it hard to believe that his attacks had no effect on his opponent. Wu Mazi refused to believe that this boy had a body of steel, so he wanted to try punching him again. The criminal began to punch him again and again, but our hero remained standing in the middle of the carriage, without even moving. The protagonist criticized and humiliated his opponent, saying that his massage was too gentle. Wu Mazi had no intention of giving up, his red eyes flashing. He was determined to strike with all his might. When the muscular ghost did this, the protagonist's golden armor automatically activated, protecting him. Chen Mu, who was clearly not impressed by this blow, decided to feign surprise and said that this attack was already in full swing. The criminal became even more tense when he saw this armor and asked where Chen Mu got the heavy death armor from. The protagonist decided to counterattack, grabbed his opponent by the wrist and briefly replied that it was none of his business. The guy threw him over his shoulder so that Wu Mazi fell to the floor, and now it was Chen Mu's turn to mock the robber. The phantom subway employee, blushing, watched her lover's actions and exclaimed how cool he was. When Wu Mazi was beaten by our hero, the man still did not give in. He continued to threaten Chen Mu. The criminal lay on the floor and lamented that he would not leave it like this, and he would definitely come back to take revenge on the guy. A moment later, he regretted it because suddenly his opponent returned and stood in front of him. Wu Mazi stuttered and looked fearfully at Chen Mu, whose menacing shadow loomed over the man, and asked what he was doing. The protagonist replied that he couldn't watch anyone suffer, and Wu Mazi was probably in a lot of pain right now. Chen Mu declared that he would help the man end his suffering. He lifted one of his legs off the floor, and Wu Mazi panicked. Wu Mazi understood what our hero wanted to do with him and tried to dissuade him, because he did not want to go to heaven. The guy looked at him coolly and declared that his actions would be considered self-defense, since the wanted criminal had attacked him first. Chairman Li stood up for our hero. He was ready to confirm that Boss Chen acted in self-defense. The subway employee was also willing to confirm that Boss Chen had acted only to protect innocent lives. Wu Mazi trembled with fear. Pressing himself to the floor, he fell for the enemy's trick and began to panic even more. Putting his foot on the criminal's head, the protagonist asked Wu Mazi if he had any last words to say. The legendary robber was adamant and shouted that he would rather lose his life than work for Chen Mu. The protagonist replied that he liked these words, and again raised his leg off the floor to attack Wu Mazi. The fatal events in the subway car have ended. Chairman Li and law enforcement have cordoned off the train with tape. Director Li was happy and told Chen Mu that it was only thanks to him that they were able to deal with Wu Mazi. The protagonist smiled and modestly replied to the metro chairman that it was the least he could do in this situation. The chubby ghost that Wu Mazi had attacked earlier was screaming and complaining of pain and was already being treated by medical workers. A doctor in a white mask tried to calm the wounded man and promised that doctors would help him. The fat man blossomed when he heard these words. He immediately stopped roaring and screaming, receiving hope to be cured and live on. The doctors assured him that the best doctors in their hospital would perform the operation on him. Chen Mu did not mind, because it was good advertising for his medical institution. Soon, Chen Mu, the subway director, and his subordinate went to the chairman's office. Lu stated that they were now indebted to the guy. According to the happy man, if it weren't for Chen Mu, the ghost subway's reputation would have been ruined forever. The protagonist smiled and replied that, naturally, he stood up to defend the metro, since it was an enterprise that would soon belong to him. The jubilant Chairman Li guessed that Chen Mu was planning to buy the subway, but still decided to check with the guy. The guy said that this was a very promising enterprise and asked how much Li was willing to sell it for. Chairman Li asked the boy to drop the formality and assured him that they sincerely wanted to work under him. The man laughed and said that he was willing to give Chen Mu the ghost subway for free if he agreed to it. The protagonist was stunned to hear this. He felt awkward accepting such a large enterprise as a gift and believed that this was not right. However, Chairman Li tried to convince the guy that it was perfectly normal and that he was truly happy to give him the subway for free. Chen Mu laughed and didn't try to argue with the director anymore. He didn't mind getting the Enterprise for free. The protagonist never even dreamed that one fine day the businessmen of the ghost world would start giving him enterprises. The guy finally realized what privileges his increased status and combat power actually gave him. His mouth dropped open in surprise when Chairman Lee handed him the completed contract to sign. Without thinking twice, the protagonist signed the contract to officially become the owner of the Ghost Metro. The guy looked in surprise at the contract, which began to turn into streams of bright purple light. The protagonist rejoiced, absorbing the energy of the contract. Another large corporation was in his pocket. He immediately gave the first order. From today, the salaries of all Metro employees will be tripled. The subway employee was very happy to hear this news. She thanked her boss and praised him for his generosity. Our hero waved his hand and asked the girl not to rush to thank him, because this was not the only order. Transforming into a stern boss, Chen Mu announced that he was giving his employees a week to get the ghostly subway back in order. The ghost girl wasn't scared. She guaranteed on behalf of the entire team that the entire metro would be cleaned to a shine. The protagonist also had special orders for Chairman Lee, who would still be working in the subway under Chen Mu. The happy metro director jumped up from his seat and asked his boss to call him simply Xiao Li from now on. Chen Mu declared that he would give Xiao Li an annual salary of 1 million ghost coins and an additional 1% of the subway shares. Chairman Lee thought that he would now earn 100 times more than when he himself was the boss of the subway. The new boss ordered his subordinates to immediately find several powerful horrors to guard the metro, since security issues require no delay. Xiao Li clenched his fist and promised that he would immediately start looking for reliable security guards for the subway. Chen Mu stood up and left. Now all the necessary businesses in the food, education, medicine, and transportation sectors had been bought up by him in advance. He imagined himself as the king of the apocalypse, sitting on the throne, because now he was finally standing firmly on his feet. The protagonist felt as if there was a golden crown on his head, and he was looking down on the entire ghostly world. After the events in the metro, the guy returned to the Gorny Vodi estate, where renovations had recently begun. He was glad that he would finally be able to relax and rest peacefully, since the previous days had been devoted to intense work. He didn't get to rest for long, because the guy was immediately disturbed by an intrusive phone call. The protagonist was scared when he saw that Wang Guishi had called him, because the driver usually did not bother him. He answered the phone and asked if something serious had happened, that Wang Guishi had to call him himself. It turned out that a problem had arisen. A crowd of ghosts had gathered at the gates of the estate, demanding a personal meeting with Chen Mu. Chen Mu frowned, suspecting that ghosts were attacking the manor, but Wang Guishi hurried to reassure the boss. The personal driver explained that the horrors had gathered under the estate with gifts because they wanted to make a deal with Chen Mu.